explosion in Oxfordshire in the United Kingdom. Let's take a look at this because we do have some very fiery visual. You can see this is a pretty significant situation. Witnesses reported seeing a fireball light up the night sky after the blast. Producer says we do have some video.
Oh my God.
Richard, have authorities established the cause of this explosion?
dragolisks.com.
White cloth can be dyed, the white page can be overwritten, and the white light can be broken.
In which case it is no longer white. And he that breaks a thing to find out what it is has left the path of wisdom.
And he or she that breaks the thing because they despise what it is
has entered the path of failure. Because the Rings of Power Season 2 has become the living embodiment of our expectations were low, but holy f***. After following up a Season 1 where they lost 63% of their viewers, with a Season 2 that could be worse. And as predicted, of the 37% that were left, they lost 45% so far. But this is a failure Amazon earned. Years ago, I warned them against making an enemy out of the Tolkien fandom, who are more than happy to bandy crooked words with witless worms to roast them into oblivion. And shame on Amazon, the scholars, the Tolkien Society, the shills, and the Tolkien estate for supporting such a derisive and subversive adaptation of the professor's work. So let's get to the Rings of Power Season 2 that features a troll based on Mike Ehrmantraut from Breaking Bad and a Sauron origin story that will be like Walter White from Breaking Bad that ultimately turned into Breaking Tolkien. Previously on the Rings of Power.
This mark's very existence proves Sauron escaped.
The evil is gone.
You have not seen what I have seen.
Looks can be deceiving.
There is a tempest in me.
My people have no king.
You are more than you claim. Your people have no king, for you are him.
Some of us will fall, but his brothers. Get out home!
Anybody bring any extra bags?
No, nobody brought an extra bag.
Come with me to Middle Earth, and together we will redeem both our bloodlines.
Be careful. I ain't got the hero, you see.
Get me the meat. I'm going to it all.
A few inches later.
My name is Darrell Weathers, and I'm with the Construction Workers Union. I work with a lot of fine men who have families to feed. I don't know about y'all, but we work long and hard to get our pay up to a level where we can make a decent living.
And these knife ears took our chubs.
There's no king of the Southlands. The line was broken. Tell me, aren't they?
I've had many names.
In a year full of repurposed sequels and prequels filled with repurposed dialogue and scenes, it shouldn't surprise anyone that the Rings of Power Season 2 Episode 1's very first line is Sauron repurposing some Gandalf dialogue from the books.
But stories are told of Sauron's fall long ago.
That is so. But always, after arrested, the shadow takes another shape and grows again.
Always after defeat. The shadow takes another shape and grows again.
And no, obviously this isn't Charlie Vickers, Halbrand / Sauron. It's a flashback with some pudgy guy who looks like he just got back from a Ren fair. Retardatar, the Lord of Snacks. In the books, after the defeat of Morgoth, Sauron lays low for a few hundred years and not much is known until now. Thank Eru, we have the keen minds at Amazon, including their all-female director staff, to give us the untold story. Turns out Fatatar, the Lord of Ding Dongs, is going to take over for Morgoth and crown himself the new Dark Lord. And his coronation is in front of a crowd of orcs that quite frankly look good. Unfortunately, they're for a modern audience. They're kinder, they're gentler, they're misunderstood. And they just want to hang out with their Papa Adar, one of many characters Amazon completely made up, formerly portrayed by Joseph Mawley. He's one of two actors who had the good sense to lead this show after season 1. And what do you know it? Sauron gets betrayed by recast Adar. And Sauron, the great dark sorcerer, master of phantoms and shadows, lord of werewolves, slayer of the king of Gondor, Elendil, slayer of High King Gil-galad, oops, spoilers, gets Caesared by a dozen sensitive orcs. And this all happens in a fortress in Fadadwaith, which, if you remember, is the same fortress where Guy Ladriel killed an ice troll in under 10 seconds.
And for you, Legolas, this is a duo, so that you can kill a troll as quickly as I do. You will kill something.
Anywho, Sauron Sauron turns into the Venom symbiote, eats a rat, a millipede, and a peasant woman, and turns into Halbrand. So Tolkienian. And since Tolkien is so slow and prodding with his multiple inventive languages, his meticulous world building, and that pesky characterization, Amazon decided to speed things up a bit.
One of the people who every time I look at something, it looks like it could be improved. You know, there's something wrong with it.
And instead of Sauron laying low for 500 years, it's like a day. After that, Sauron runs into an NPC who speaks fluent platitude.
There's another life waiting for you. You just have to turn toward it. But our fates are never certain, and fortunes can turn for even the most powerful. A sure path may crumble, but there's always another. Often, it can lead us someplace better.
What? And in the very next scene, which is probably that night, they know each other so well, Mr. Platitude knows when he's having bad dreams.
Nightmares again. What haunts you, sir? Nothing evil. All of us have done things that we care not to admit.
And this just so happens to be the ship that gets destroyed by the monster from season 1 that puts Sauron on a raft where he meets Guy Ladriel in the middle of the ocean. Now, why on Middle Earth would you want to remind anyone that that scene actually happened? But the only explanation is they're proud of it. That's right, Galadriel, who was hunting Sauron, runs into him in the middle of the ocean. They eventually end up on a ship. So you can ship Galadriel and Sauron, get it? Don't believe me? In an official promo from Amazon for the Rings of Power Season 2, they mentioned Halandriel. The Halandriel tease, I love you! Oh! For shipping Sauron and Galadriel. And did you hear that noise? That was Tolkien's grave exploding again. Here's an idea. Why don't you ship Galadriel with, say, her husband Celeborn, who's very much alive in the books? And it's time for another repurposed scene. Remember when Arwen was chased by the Nazguls in Lord of the Rings? Except this time, it's Guy Ladriel chasing Doogie Elrond. Guy Ladriel is trying to get the 3 Rings of Power from Elrond, who wants to destroy him because Guy Ladriel conveniently left behind a scroll that tells everyone that Halbrand was Sauron. Eventually, Guy Ladriel and Doogie Elrond end up at High District Manager Gil-galad's office. And the jig is up, and Guy Ladriel finally has to admit that Halbrand is Sauron. She knew it and didn't tell them. He played a part in the forging of the Rings of Power, and she wanted to jump his Baradur. Now, in the books, the 3 Rings of Power, Narya, Nenya, and Vilya, were the last Rings of Power forged alone by Celebrimbor without Sauron's direct influence prior to the forging of the One Ring. So they acted differently, and their purpose was to slow the natural decaying of the world. But because Amazon knows better in this show, they forged the 3 Elven Rings of Power first. And it's only because it was Guy Ladriel's idea and the Master Smith of Middle-earth, Celebrimbor, just learned about this thing called alloy from Sauron. Aside from the fact that within the frame of this show, every bad thing that happens now is directly Guy Ladriel's fault for not telling anybody Halbrand was Sauron. She gets a slight talking to from High District Manager Gil-galad, who now demands that Elrond give back the rings. Instead of doing that, Doogie Elrond acts as a surrogate for the audience and jumps off a cliff. Now, in Tolkien's secondary world, many elves have fallen from high places and died, but this is a world where they can survive pyroclastic flows. But it's time we check in on female Frodo and the stranger who's totally not Gandalf, and in the interest of saving time, we're now going to call him Dangalf. And mystery boxing this guy's name for over a season and a half is one of the dumbest things I've ever seen in storytelling. And their scene opens up with some more mind reading.
Got that look in your eye. You had that dream again last night, didn't you?
Didn't we just see that?
Nightmares again.
Is there a fucking echo in here?
After a scene where they clearly want to push eat the bugs.
I can feel an X in the throat.
That's the best part. They're dancing.
It's time to repurpose more of Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. Remember the 2 towers?
It can't be. The trees. We're going in circles.
This looks strangely familiar.
Because we've been here before. We're going in circles.
Remember when Sam and Frodo were followed by Gollum? It turns out they're also being followed by some Easterlings who look like something out of Farscape, a show that is 1,000 times better with 1,000th of the budget. Now, of course, Doogie Elrond survives, and he goes to a character that we've been waiting to see. Círdan the Shipwright, a ring bearer, an elf with a beard, the oldest and wisest of their kind. You know how I know this?
Please forgive the unexpected nature of my visit, but I have nowhere else to turn. You are the oldest and wisest of our kind.
Who walks up to anybody and says this? Hey, Garrett, you're the reasonably intelligent and quarter blackest of our kind. Doogie Elrond tells Círdan he wants to destroy the rings, and because it's been a few minutes, it's time for some more repurposed dialogue.
The rings must be destroyed. Do so, the age of the elves will end. We are abandoning Earth to its fate.
The time of the elves is over. Do we leave Middle-earth to its fate?
After discovering Círdan's going to destroy the rings, High District Manager Gil-galad blackpills and gathers the elves to leave Middle-earth, despite knowing that Sauron is back. But Gil-galad is a good High District Manager because he manages to get this done in half a day. But wouldn't you know it, right when they're singing their goodbye hymn, Círdan shows up with the Rings of Power saying that they work. And despite this show taking the 6'4" Galadriel, the embodiment of femininity and grace, the Lady of Lothlorien, the Lady of Light, and turning her into a midget warrior woman, the commander of the northern armies, Galadriel, the girl Barian, the Lady of Fight, the woman who helped Sauron return and then hid that fact, the ring Nenya chooses her. And then we get our money shot with the Rings of Power, which looks like it went on a little too long. Look at all those shaking hands. And just like that, Lindon is healed, all the black ooze is gone. Now, earlier on in the episode, the wise and noble High King Gil-galad composed the most important message in Middle-earth in half a millennia, telling Grandma Brimbor that Halbrand is Sauron. Sure, it's something Galadriel could have told him, but that's not important right now. So what does the wisest and noblest of elf leaders do? Does he send out multiple elves to make sure the message makes it? Or does he just give it to one guy and say, it'll be fine? If you guess the latter, you're watching the Rings of Power on Amazon Prime. I sure hope nothing happens to that guy, because that would thwart the master plan of our thirst trap Dark Lord. So let's circle back to Sauron while he circles back from Mordor to Eregion, so Amazon Prime can circle back to the lore. After heading down to the shiny and brand new Mordor, Sauron does his best Moses impression.
Let my people go.
And Sauron's big master plan is to convince Adar that he's still the king of the Southlands, which he does, and to convince Adar to send him back to Eregion with the elves so he can stop Sauron, who he totally isn't, which he does. And on the way out the door, he gets poor Waldred killed. You know, the guy who just wanted to follow Sauron and helped create Mordor in an afternoon. Also, he could go back and forge the rest of the Rings of Power, which he should have done in the first place, as Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, which they should have done in the first place, which was something apparently they added in at the last moment.
But we didn't know we'd do the Anatar. That was something that came to the piece quite late on.
Back to Galadriel, who has a vision of Celebrimbor, who basically blames her for everything that's about to happen.
What news?
I've had an unexpected visitor.
Are they not seeds you planted?
Yeah, Lance.
And the reason she's having these visions is because the rings have rekindled them. Oh, what's that? It's time for some more repurposed dialogue.
You believe the rings have kindled your ability to see that which has not yet come to pass.
And some things that have not yet come to pass.
But now High District Manager Gil-galad is finally going to do something now that he knows who Sauron is, no thanks to Galadriel. So they plan to attack the brand new shiny Mordor. How do they know Sauron is there?
What are the whereabouts of Sauron?
Our spies indicate that Sauron was last seen traveling into Mordor.
I mean, I'm not sure how, seeing that no one knew who Sauron was at the end of Season 1 when he entered Mordor. But you have just thousands of elves hanging around the mountains, and how in the hell did they miss all those orcs digging trenches from Season 1? And how would they know what Halbrand looked like? Despite the show being long and prodding, it obviously borrowed the teleporter from the later seasons of Game of Thrones, and you have no idea how much time has passed. But at least those elven spies hanging out in mountains and recognizing people they've never seen before can at least send messages that get received. Because wouldn't you know it, that one lone guy with the most important message in Middle-earth for the last 500 years, Halbrand is Sauron, gets killed. That was a lucky break for the Dark First Lord. Now, credit to the show, they did mention in passing that other messages have been sent to Grandma Brimbor, but they've been unanswered.
Our letters to Celebrimbor have all gone unanswered. I fear Sauron may be in Eregion.
Now, did High District Manager Gil-galad do anything about it? Nah. Galadriel had to talk him into it. And that's a good thing because Halbrand goes back to Eregion where everyone is clueless that he's Sauron.
Well, isn't that convenient for you?
And after playing hard to get for a little while, Grandma Brimbor invites Sauron in to manipulate and seduce him into creating more rings that they should have made before the Elven Rings. And as far as this statement from the showrunners is concerned,
so many of us in the LGBT community see ourselves in Tolkien's writings. Any chance we see ourselves on the show?
Maybe you have already.
Grandma Brimbor is my pick. Hey, guess who's back? Back again. Slim Lady's back. Tell a friend. And apparently everyone outside of Eregion knows that Sauron is back and that he's taken a new form.
Sauron's shadow is deepening. It is said he has taken a new form to deceive his enemies.
And Feminem works for a dark wizard in Rune that either Amazon made up, or worse, they're going to do something stupid like make him the Witch King of Aemon. And before anyone says, that doesn't make any sense, for one, you're right, but that hasn't stopped them. Case in point, the possibly made-up dark wizard and Feminem are after Dangal, female Frodo and female Sam. They send out some bad guys for Mad Max, no, not the real Mad Max, Fury Road or Furiosa. And this gives them another opportunity to give us some repurposed scenes. The bad guys from Furiosa eventually catch up with Dangal, female Sam, and female Frodo at a well, and I can't imagine anything bad happening here. It just has a giant flag with the Eye of Sauron on it. And this brings us to my favorite scene in all three of the premiere episodes. Dangal picks up a stick, creates a dust devil that blows away the bad guys from Furiosa and female Sam and female Frodo. This brings us to the second most cringe-inducing moment in this series. The reveal of Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, who should have been in Season 1, but Amazon really had to ship Galadriel. And the shape-shifting Lord of Werewolves, Phantoms, and Shadows, the mighty Sauron the Great, puts on a wig. And then he says this.
What, are we some kind of Lord of the Rings?
Oh, and if you thought the repurposing was over, oh, my sweet summer child. The man who cut the ring from Sauron's hand, Isildur, surprisingly enough, didn't die at the end of Season 1. Apparently, he was caught by Shelob.
You know, Isildur wakes up in a spider cave and has to fight Shelob in the first sequence, so...
And not just any Shelob. Ungoliant is a primordial being that formed into a giant spider that helped Melkor destroy the trees of Valinor, who also happens to be an ancestor of Shelob, and I'm still holding out for baby Shelob. And my prayers have been answered, according to the Nerdist from Maxim Baldry. So was that Shelob you fight in Episode 3? In Episode 3, it's Shelob. It's baby Shelob. Oh, fuck off! Aside from all the aforementioned problems with this show, one of its biggest is being packed with characters you can give a crap about, meandering around in an uninteresting, unengaging, creative, bankrupt story that's filled with and-thens. And then Isildur finds his horse, meets a girl I could give a crap what her name is, and runs into Dawn Lemonless. This brings us to the second person who had the good sense to leave this show after Season 1, the actress whose name I cannot pronounce, who played Bronwyn, because she dead. And it's a damn shame we're not going to get that Guess Who's Coming to Second Breakfast. And now Dawn Lemonless is a single dad to Theo, and that's at least until he goes out to get some pipe weed and never comes home. One of the worst travesties of the show, which there are many, is the Númenóreans. And their move armor, they're all supposed to be an average height of 6'4", and Elendil is supposed to be almost 8 feet tall. That's why they call him Elendil the Tall. Instead, we get a bunch of people who look like YouTubers. Now, to be fair to Amazon, they have to play it fast and loose with the timeline. The events from the books that this fanfic is derived from happens just a little bit after the forging of the Rings of Power. But it's not long. Only 1,800 years, and instead of Ar-Pharazôn forcing his cousin Miriel into marriage to seize the throne, Amazon has chosen a different path because they wouldn't want to rob Miriel of her agency. It sounds like it's pretty easy to become a king in the Rings of Power. You either need to steal a necklace or stand next to an eagle. Unfortunately, Amazon missed an opportunity to fix what Peter Jackson did do in his films. The eagles can talk. Now, one of the few compliments I gave the Rings of Power was the looks of the dwarves and Khazad-dûm. Unfortunately, their storyline was incredibly boring and was filled with the first female dwarf of color in this show, Disa, literally. The show insinuates Sauron causes an earthquake that collapses the sun shafts of Khazad-dûm, making it impossible for the famous vegetarian dwarfs to grow their crops. But let's be real, Disa could probably skip a couple meals.
You think this is about food?
Yup.
And despite the dwarves hollowing out an entire mountain, the Dwarven Health and Safety Inspector says they can't dig new sun shafts. Other than that, the rest of the dwarf storyline is wasted with Disa yapping and waiting for Durin the Fourth to talk to his dad Durin the Third. But they're in luck. Thanks to Sauron, Grandma Brimbor offers the dwarves a deal. You give us Mithril, we'll make you some ranks. Hey, remember Peter Jackson's The Hobbit?
Harold Elrond said he can do little else than helping his dwarven friend. He speaks of you so far.
Funny, he's never mentioned you. You have your grandfather's bearing. You saw when you ruled under the mountain.
Indeed. They don't mention you.
Eventually, the Durins reconcile and agree to the deal, and the forging of the Rings of Power out of order has begun. It looks like Season 2 is going to be the character assassination of Sauron, just like Season 1 was the character assassination of Galadriel, but they're not quite done with her yet. Galadriel finally has to come to terms with something she never had to deal with in the books. Falling under the influence of Sauron. Now, Tolkien is famous for a lot of things, but mostly for his use of language is unequal, while the Rings of Power's use of dialogue is a good argument for AI. From the writing staff that gave us this banger.
Do you know why a ship floats on a stone canal?
What?
The ship has a secret. For unlike the stone, her gaze is not downward but up. Fixed upon the light that guides her.
Keep in mind, these writers went on strike to get more money so they can give us more of this.
Sauron used me, and under his hand I was played like a harp to a melody not of my choosing.
And yes, they're really leaning into the shipping, and this is character assassination right up there with Indiana Jones and the Dial of Dysentery, Han Solo in The Force Awakens, Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi, and the Doctor in Doctor Who.
Sauron looked inside you, plucked the very song of your soul, note by note, making himself out to be exactly what you needed, the lost king who could ride you to victory.
Things go well, I might be showing him my old face. Oh, you know what I'm talking about. Oh.
But wait! There's more!
After all the talk of morally great characters on the red carpet, we have the single most cringe-inducing scene in this show, nuanced orcs in Tolkien.
We are safe here. We have a home. Must we go to war again?
You gotta be fucking kidding.
Tell you that we will never truly be safe until we make certain Sauron is no more.
But you guys just don't understand. The orcs just want to multiply, raise their kids, be evil, and practice their corrupted form of life in peace. This has sparked a debate online that's been going on in the Tolkien fandom for quite a while. Are orcs evil? Yes. Are they irredeemable? Well, that's something that's perfectly fine to discuss within the works of the professor, but if you're trying to use it to justify anything in this show while ignoring everything else...
Be silent. Keep your phone tongue behind your teeth.
Conflicted.
Get me the meat.
Go back to the boat, go back to the boat, go back to the boat.
Until the next through.
You know, we sealed the Wex up in a spider cave and asked to fight Shelob in the first sequence, so...
What about a call you? I am your partner. A sharer of gifts.
Previously on the Rings of Power.
The Eastar will submit to me. Because if he doesn't, I will slaughter the halflings he calls friends.
Sounds good to me. Target complete, Lord Father.
Must we go to war again?
We'll never truly be safe until we've made certain Sauron is no more.
Looks like meat back on the menu, boys.
Since the wearing of this ring, I have perceived glimpses of the unseen world.
What's a plea with you? Let's make rings for men. Rings for men.
Okay, everyone, let's get started. Yes, beautiful feeling, X. Let's get some smiles all in here. That's it, yes. Let's let the inside out. Okay, you're an animal. Yes, there we go. You're a tiger. It's not even shooting. It's crazy. And I'm spent.
Worry not, my brother.
For I am the master of disguises.
Elrond's task is not to join your company, but to lead it.
that the most important messages sent in Middle-earth in over half a millennia haven't made it, warning Grandma Brimbor that Sauron is on his way back to Eregion to forge more rings.
Our letters to Celebrimbor have all gone unanswered. I fear Sauron may be in Eregion. The High King has consented to send me and a small party there to ensure Celebrimbor and the city are safe.
After being talked into it by Guy Ladriel, High District Manager Gil Galad finally decides to do something about it by demoting her and promoting Doogie Elrond.
We fixed the glitch.
Who immediately asks for help.
We shall need an archer to swordsman. I trust you can make another set.
Now you'd think after they pretty much confirmed Sauron is returning to Eregion there would be some sort of sense of urgency, but no. Guy Ladriel still needs to pick a team.
Yes, I can recommend an archer and 2 swordsmen.
Now this is a pretty important mission. You'd think she'd at least pick 100 of the best and brightest. 50 wouldn't be so bad. 25 would be really pushing it.
Nope, just 4.
And after a transitional scene in a show that's already ripped off dialogue and scenes from Peter Jackson's The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, why not rip off a shot? And later on we find out Guy Ladriel picked 4 of the best archers and swordsmen from your local Starbucks. Props to X-Ray Girl for making the team. And they're off to Eregion until they come up on a bridge that Detective Doogie Elrond thinks is destroyed by lightning.
Lightning.
You are so dumb. You are really dumb. For real.
But Lieutenant Guy Ladriel quickly surmises it's Sauron, and then her ringy senses tingling. And not to worry, despite being handed some humiliation and a very temporary demotion, making you think that they might be steering Galadriel back into her graceful Lady of Light form, insufferable girl boss Guy Ladriel makes her triumphant return this episode.
This company will not take counsel from that trinket. If you cannot abide by those terms, you will leave now and return to Lindon.
I should like to, because I do not wish to see any of this company slay, including you.
Ah yes, Galadriel and Elrond bickering for an entire episode. So Tolkienian. It reminds me of that deleted scene from Lord of the Rings.
You're a real fucker. I'm gonna slap you in public.
You have man boobs.
I'm gonna punch you in the ovary. That's what I'm gonna do. Straight shot.
Oh,
Right to the baby maker.
And just when you thought this show couldn't sink any lower, it's time for some more creatively bankrupt repurposing within creatively bankrupt repurposing. Despite showrunners J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay saying that they're going to make the Tolkien novel that he never wrote, these creative geniuses are just going to copy and paste events from the books in the Third Age and force them into this fanfic fever dream. But there's a twist. They're going to do what Peter Jackson didn't do. I would argue they've already done that. Peter Jackson made a good Lord of the Rings adaptation, and J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay made the worst adaptation of all time. And these outright thieves get right to work. This brings us to Tom Bombadil and the Barrow-wights, characters and events from the books that were famously left out of Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. Let's start with the merry fellow, Tom Bombadil, master of wood, water, and hill, and quite possibly one of the first beings to roam Middle-earth in his summer home in Rune. He runs into Dangalf, and just in case Peter Jackson was feeling left out, don't worry, mate. Be prepared for some whiplash because this is repurposing squared. Peter Jackson repurposed events featuring Tom Bombadil from the books for Treebeard and the Two Towers. The Rings of Power repurposed those same events featuring Tom Bombadil from the books and put them in the Second Age. Repurposed shots from Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, who was repurposing events featuring Tom Bombadil in the books.
You should have taught me where again.
You should have been
Eat earth.
Eat earth.
Dig deep.
Dig deep.
Drink water. Go to sleep. You copied my whole fucking flow.
I know. Subtle. I don't know why the very litigious Warner Brothers isn't suing someone at this point. And I can hear the Rings of Power stands now. It's totally different from the books. It's not Old Man Willow. It's Old Man Ironwood.
Even your trio, they're Old Man Ironwood.
Great, maybe next episode Tom Bombadil will introduce us to another tree, Old Man Morningwood. Unfortunately, the character assassination doesn't end there. Old Tom Bombadil from the books is so aloof. The Council of Elrond considered giving him the One Ring, but decided against it as he'd forget about it. The Rings of Power Tom Bombadil, who we will now call Tom Bombadil, is a slightly more predatorial Yoda. And it sounds like old Dangalf wants to learn a little bit more than magic.
Might you teach me how to wield a staff?
Clean your hands, wash your face, and come join me by the fire.
I was never meant to find a staff under the star. Present from you, wasn't it?
You're not the first the staff was eaten honey by the fire.
Years ago, there was another dark wizard.
And you heard that right. The other E-Star that ate honey by Tom Bombadil's fire went to the dark side. He lost a Padawan, who just so happens to be the dark wizard that's totally not supposed to remind us of Saruman. This brings us to the next series of Third Age events repurposed from the books. And yes, I'm fully aware that I'm saying the word repurposed a lot because they're doing it a lot. The Barrow Downs and the Barrow Whites. Now, in Professor Tolkien's masterful work, Tom Bombadil saves Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin, who succumbed to the Barrow Whites, and quite frankly, this is something I wish Peter Jackson put in his Lord of the Rings. In the Rings of Power, we have the Elven Baristas, Doogie Elrond, and Warrior Galadriel fighting them because we need a battle scene. But I have to admit that it's an interesting choice that for the second season in a row, they put the Elf of Color in chains.
Black guy always dies first.
After losing an elven red shirt, we find out it was the Barrow Whites that killed the guy who had the most important message in Middle-earth in half a millennium, telling Celebrimbor that Sauron is back.
The king sent a dispatch to warn Celebrimbor. This dispatch.
Now, the show would like you to believe that ending up in the Barrow Downs is all Doogie Elrond's fault for not listening to Guy Ladriel's ring sense.
We won't reach anywhere at speed if we walk into a trap.
We go south.
Commander, I must protest.
Your opinion on the matter has been heard.
Elrond.
Opinion heard, Lieutenant.
But in truth, it's Guy Ladriel's fault because she didn't tell anybody when she had a chance that Sauron was back. Anyway, Tom Bombadil wasn't hanging around in Rune training wizards in magic and losing a Padawan to the dark side. No one knew what the Astari or wizards were in the Second Age. Gandalf wasn't in the Second Age. How in the hell would Guy Ladriel know who the Barrow Whites are?
What are they? Barrow Whites.
Because they didn't arrive until the Third Age, like Gandalf, but I don't even know why I bother. Speaking of things that don't belong in this show, let's go to female Sam and female Frodo, who we last saw getting sucked up by a dirt devil, and unfortunately they survived. They run into what Amazon contractually cannot call hobbits. These are the stewards, the ancestors of Frodo, including this guy.
Buckwheat? Yeah.
Buckwheat, which interestingly enough would probably work as a hobbit name, takes female Sam and female Frodo to their local village. And when Amazon's given an opportunity to correctly portray the diversity that Tolkien accounted for in his books, no, we get multicultural stores, who, like the Harfoots, are a bunch of little assholes who eventually show them that there's a Shire prophecy. But we did get one step closer to figuring out the big mystery over a season and a half. What's Dangalf's name? But first I have to acknowledge that I missed a hint in the 3-episode premiere.
Did you lose control then? I was banned.
So we find again, there's plenty of sticks all over the place.
Okay, so not Frodo has just indirectly confirmed that not Gandalf is in fact Gandalf.
Well done on Johnny Law for catching that, and sorry, no, I don't speak fluent stage Irish. As Johnny correctly points out in his video, Gandalf is derived from Norse mythology. The word Gand or Gandir means essentially magic staff mixed with elf, Gandalf. But if that wasn't on the nose for you enough, well, there's this.
This friend of yours, who is he anyways?
He's a giant.
Oh, like an elf?
Bigger than that.
Oh, so he's a great big grand elf.
Not a meat, match.
Maybe by the end of the season we'll find out Dangalf's name, and then the next mystery will be who's the Dark Wizard. Yes, there is another storyline in this slog that's barely worth mentioning. Girl Sildur and Don Lemonless, who are in search of Theo. You remember Theo, the son of Bronwyn, the Middle-earth dispensary owner who died. He and the other wild men were captured by the Ents and put in tree cages. And despite the giant gaping holes, nobody bothers to escape. Now some other stuff happened, but it's not worth talking about, because in truth, this scene only exists to do this. Remember the Fellowship of the Rings?
What was that?
There are nameless things in the deep places of this world.
There are bigger and finer things than orcs in the deep places.
assist so we can get more shipping. Hooking up Estrid, the completely made-up character by Amazon, and Isildur. How do I know this? Well, it comes directly from the ex-Twitter account of Amazon's The Rings of Power.
I acrimoniously loathe shipping in all its manifestations, and always have done so since I grew old and wary enough to detect its presence.
Anywho, they eventually catch up to the Ents and free Theo. Now prepare yourselves, I'm about to give The Rings of Power a compliment. The Ents look pretty good, especially in the scene where the Ent husband gets cucked by Don Lemless.
Tell me, Shabzi, is it true what they say about the way you people are gifted?
Now back to the Elven Away team with Doogie Elrond and Guy Ladriel, who can apparently force heal elves now.
That's not how the ring works.
And it was noble of Guy Ladriel to give up the ring to Doogie Elrond and send the elves away so she could have a solo female empowerment moment. And we also got an inversion of this scene.
Why not alone? I stand alone.
But this is the moment you've all been waiting for. Galadriel, as she's described in the books. Tall, grave, and beautiful, she was clad wholly in white, with hair of deep gold, and no sign of age was upon her, unless it were the depths of her eyes, for these were keen as lancers in the starlight, and yet profound with the wells of deep memory. Came to kick some ass! How she discovered napalm powers by shooting 2 arrows through a campfire and a couple of lanterns. Think about all the orc fathers who aren't coming home tonight. Unfortunately, our girl boss warrior Guy Ladriel gets caught by a Dar, but lives to repurpose more Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings in future episodes.
I was there. I led Isildur into the heart of Mount Doom.
Cast it into the fire! Destroy it!
Should have ended that day.
Previously on the Rings of Power.
Fire motor the ground shakes. It's spread through the bones of the earth, elapsing our sun shafts our ability to grow crops.
No, I'm gonna starve!
These rings will be beyond any power yet devised by dwarf or man. They shall be rings of power.
Queen of Lies, unfaithful rule!
His dying words, the king spoke to me and said it was from this she took counsel. This elf stone is your queen!
The legion of orcs have marched into elvish lands.
That trail, I gather it leads to Eregion. Your High King believes the dwarves to be unworthy. In fact, he has forbidden the forging of any more rings at all.
We have not the time to bandy words about convincing him who is worthy of aid.
Whoa, gay!
Now some have said episode 5 is the best of the worst. Now, if by best you mean boring, sure. Since this episode is such a slog, we'll do what the Rings of Power does to the lore and just hit the bullet points. But unlike this show, we'll do it in order. And why not with your opening shot, rip off the opening shot of the 2 towers? We start out in Moria, where the dwarvish health and safety inspector said it wasn't safe to dig after the sun shafts collapsed. I mean, never mind the giant windows Moria has, but that's not important right now. And never mind the dwarves who mined out an entire mountain are all of a sudden afraid to dig. And although the dwarven rings were made for wealth and power, essentially, amplifying their natural skills, and eventually it led to them being greedy and wrath, just like with Galadriel, they also come with a ringy sense. Durin III is able to find out where to dig, and the famine that started 2 days ago, 3 weeks ago, 3 months ago, I have no idea, is taken care of.
Barely an inconvenience.
Then the dwarves jump on the Middle-earth high-speed train and head on over to Eregion. Remember the Fellowship of the Ring?
Oh, I remember.
Remember the doors to Moria?
The doors of Durin, Lord of Moria. Speak, friend, and enter.
At this point, dear viewer, because you didn't watch the show, you're probably wondering, did they show us the creation of the western doors of Moria? Nope, they didn't even do that. They just showed it.
The doors of Durin. Unreachable, visible only by moonlight, and guarded by a password known only to friends.
Now what the hell were the doors of Durin doing in Eregion in Sauron's presence? I have no idea. It's a good thing he didn't use the knowledge to find him and understand that password hint.
It works, sir. We have the combination. Great. What's the combination? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes. That's amazing. I've got the same combination on my luggage.
Then Grandma Brimbor and Thirst Trapitar go and argue like an old married gay couple about putting some men's fingers in some rings.
Rings for men. I did not say anything about the rings. It is a game you play. Have you had a change of heart? No. This is to speak of men tomorrow. I would prefer to speak of them now.
Cat-tea. This is followed by quite possibly the worst travesty in this episode when discussing how easily corruptible men are. Hair Club for Minotaur, the Lord of Wigs, invokes names from the books.
There are always some who rise forth and shine. Elendir, Tur, Beren.
Now, Sauron right there is trying to justify giving rings to men by using the name Eredil, who is a half-elf. But to be fair to Amazon, they only had $1 billion and probably couldn't afford the research. But as far as Baron of Baron and Luthien is concerned...
Oh! Oh, wow! Will Smith just smacked the shit out of it.
Keep Baron's name out the mouth!
I'm going to, okay?
But then there's this unintentional but quite accurate meta-statement from the show.
Let us not tempt failure by allowing our reach to exceed our grasp.
This brings us to the mighty men of Westerness, the Numenorians. If adapted properly, this could take up its own show of 25 episodes per season for the next decade. In the Rings of Power, they've been reduced to a C plot that plays out like a telenovela. Don't believe me?
Porque tus padres no están en Europa, sino en la miserable vecindad del quinto patio en la que vives. ¿Vas a negarme que vives en una vecindad?
Sí. Sí, es cierto.
You'll have to forgive me because I'm still trying to get this scene right in my head, but essentially Muriel tells Elendil to keep his head down because he had a vision in the Palantir of him riding a horse, and it wasn't the vision that she was getting from the Palantir of Numenor's destruction, although she didn't tell him she had that vision. If that doesn't make any sense to you, it shouldn't, because it doesn't. And before anybody tells me what Elendil's vision meant according to the Lord, stop. We're talking about the Rings of Power here. And it's time we check back with this character.
Look familiar?
Actually, no. Oh yeah, the daughter of Elendil, an Amazon creation that was never in the lore, who betrays him for Arpharazon, who only exists to force meaningless conflict and give us scenes with some unintentionally meta lines that tell us exactly how Amazon feels about Tolkien.
You mock that which is sacred.
I mock that which is absurd.
And since we're overdue, it's time for some repurposed dialogue.
Until we meet again in the far green country under a swift sun.
Far green country under a swift sunrise.
Anyway, let's get this over with. Arpharazon tells his Amazon original character's son that his mom said he wouldn't amount to anything, forcing him to be a guy whose name I can't bother to remember, going off to kill a guy whose name I can't bother to remember. I'm supposed to care so much about this character who is dying. I just remembered his name when the closed captions reminded me of it. Oh no, don't die! No! I will avenge you! Checks notes. Elendil! Meanwhile, back in Moria, we get another unintentional meta line that describes how everyone involved in this show really feels.
A gift from Owley, one that's honed and refined over a lifetime. And this, it feels somehow like cheating.
Now, if I told you the following scene was Disa dropping a crystal ball down a hallway about 10 feet from a major market that no dwarves have discovered in thousands of years, and then singing and waking up a Balrog, would you believe me? Well, that's exactly what happens. Disa drops a ball down a hallway about 10 feet from a major market, and then sings and wakes up a Balrog. But not to worry, the Balrog is a slow riser. It's going to take him a little under 4,000 years to finally get out of bed, which means about 2 or 3 weeks with this show. Then we get to see Durin III pass out the 7 dwarven rings, which canonically he shouldn't even have. The dwarves and the men don't get their rings until after the elves turn on Sauron, and I don't even know why I bothered. Meanwhile, back in Eregion, the Amazon original character Meridian, Mauritania, Maternity, not really sure and don't care, makes her own ring and turns invisible, which apparently is something that's lifted from Lord of the Rings Online.
Ages ago,
In the vastness of Eregion, the Dark Lord came in fair guise. In those days, he beguiled Narmada, daughter of Leodon, and broke her mind.
Strange. When the light caught your hair, for a moment you seemed like perfect likeness.
Whose likeness?
My name Galadriel's, of course.
Definition of a red flag, isn't it?
Shout out to High King Fan or Alpha Chat on X Twitter for pointing this out. These series of events almost caused Grandma Brynborg to give up the secret to Sauron about putting some men's fingers in some rings. And now the daddies are arguing again, which leads to a staff meeting with the mostly female Elven Smiths of Eregion. And this is all over the corruption of the Dwarven rings. And instead of recalling them, the multicultural Elven Smiths of Eregion decide to fight the evil rings by making more evil rings. This, of course, will be followed by a disinformation campaign, and anyone who calls this out will be called anti-smithing and against the smithing, because the smithing is settled. Meanwhile, back in Linden, High District Manager Gil-galad finally hears from Grandma Brynborg. And although it's been quite some time, how much time exactly, I have no idea with this show, and they've lost multiple messengers, and they sent out Guy Ladriel, Doogie, Elrond, and 4 of the best and brightest from your local Starbucks. And despite the message being completely suspicious, saying everything's fine and I'll do exactly what you say, and Elrond showing up after a good sprint from Eregion, saying it's been compromised, High District Manager Gil-galad says, nah, it'll be fine, we're gonna attack Mordor instead. And it wouldn't be an episode of Rings of Power without Warrior Galadriel. As you probably didn't know because you didn't watch last episode, she was captured by Adar, and despite all of her rage, she's still just a rat in a cage. And you may notice the orcs are fearful of Warrior Galadriel, as they should be. They're all just torturing hard to bring maggoty bread home to their families. But because this is Warrior Galadriel, she isn't captured long. She pulls a prison shank out of her prison wallet. And this episode saved the most absurd and the worst for last. The Amazon original character Adar offers an alliance to Galadriel with the orcs, which is as ridiculous as shipping Sauron and Galadriel. Previously on the Rings of Power.
The Hobbits. Where are they?
Well, there is what you're searching for, and there is what you find.
Might you teach me how to wield a staff?
Clean your hands, wash your face, and come join me by the fire.
Not every battle must be forged to be won. Give me your hand.
I don't care.
How much do you really know about this, Arnatar?
The orcs are up in Mordor. A legion of them are headed for Eregion. Galadriel was right.
I've been watching you all evening, and I want to tear you apart.
And this episode opens up with a man, Don Lemonless, who commits a hate crime against 3 innocent orc fathers. These poor Uruk folks were raping, pillaging, and torturing hard to provide for their families, and they were taken out by this monster, who clearly hasn't been to the Sylvan barbershop for a while. And this unwarranted slaying of innocent, corrupted forms of life was all over a map. And then he fucks off not to be seen for the rest of the episode. But to be fair to Don Lemonless, Amazon is marginalizing his character this season. And then we're back to Eregion, where the multicultural Gen Z, mostly female Smiths of Eregion call a staff meeting and call Grandma Brynborg to task for creating a hostile work environment. I guess creating the Rings of Power out of order and being the dumbest character in this show is taking its toll. And acting as a surrogate for the audience, Grandma Brynborg forgets his Amazon original character assistant's name.
What is your name again, Smith?
Do you mean you don't remember?
Motherfucker, what makes you think I care?
Then Sauron shows up and tells Modernity and the rest of the multicultural Gen Z Elven Smiths of Eregion they're getting pink slips. And he does this to allow his husband, Grandma Brynborg, to complete the 9 rings for men to put their fingers in. And apparently it wasn't only messages that weren't making it to Eregion from Linden, it was messages from Eregion. And when one of those messengers finally turns up with a message carved on him that translates to where is he, do they do anything about it? They go, nah, it'll be fine. And the scene ends with Sauron walking the battlements of Eregion and noticing orc campfires. But apparently all the lookouts and scouts missed. And as just a basic story, the only way any of this can work is everyone is retarded. Speaking of that, let's get to Galadriel and Adar, where she thinks as her prisoner they're about to discuss an alliance. That's right, an alliance between Galadriel and orcs. Now I could break down canonically why this portrays every facet of her character, but this is the show that wants her to jump Sauron's Barad-dûr. Hashtag Galadriel. Now in this instance of women taking charge, Galadriel not only confirms that Halbrand is Sauron to Adar, she tells him about the Elven ring Nenya and follows that up by telling Adar she gave it to Elrond. Stop that! Now, canonically, none of this happened, but if you set out to make the worst adaptation of all time, this would be it. My favorite part is when Adar is telling Galadriel the story of how he and half a dozen orcs seizured Sauron, and he brings out his crown, which apparently used to belong to Morgoth. Now, they mentioned they downsized it, but there's a little problem here. Morgoth used to be between 25 and 30 feet tall. And in the real story, when Morgoth fell at the end of the First Age, the Valar made his crown into a collar. Meanwhile, over at the Númenórean and the Restless, or As Middle-earth Turns, or This is the Second Age of Our Lives, shout out to Nerd Cookies for that one. After Elendil is betrayed by his Amazon original creation daughter, whose name I can't be bothered to remember.
What is your name again, Smith?
He refuses to bend the knee to Ar-Pharazôn and is sentenced to trial by Abyss. And after crying with his daughter, he cries with Miriel, and then they touch foreheads. And even after Miriel tells him to bend the knee, Elendil says no, because he's going to leave his fate to the gods, and then he says something I've been waiting for all season.
The sea is always right.
The sea is always right! The sea is always right!
The sea is always right.
What the fuck are you talking about, man?
And within a show that's completely jacked up the story of Númenor, partially by taking the race swap Miriel and making her far more prominent than she ever was so she wouldn't be robbed of her agency. Because canonically, against her will and against all laws of Númenor, Ar-Pharazôn forced his first cousin, Miriel, and yes, they're cousins, into marriage, and that's how he usurped the throne. Anyway, in the story where they didn't want to rob Miriel of her agency, she literally robs Elendil of his by taking his place at the trial of the Abyss, and after the Black Woman is spit out by the White Worm, all of a sudden the window-licking Númenóreans like her again. So let me get this straight. Within this show, to gain power in Númenor, you either have to have an eagle land next to you or be spit out by a White Worm. Did I get that right? So Tolkienian. This brings us to the Harfoots and the the Stewars, another group of characters that has been thankfully marginalized this season by Amazon. And after setting all that up, this scene is too boring and inconsequential to talk about, except for the fact that Buckwheat made out with female Sam. Now in the past, I've made some pretty harsh accusations about what Hollywood does to some of our sacred stories, some of our lore, some of our American mythology. For example, I accuse the Acolyte of taking George Lucas's lore to Harvey Weinstein's office. Well, The Rings of Power takes Tolkien's to Epstein Island, concerning Gandalf and now Maya Master, Tom Bombadil, instead of the Tom Bombadil from the books, who's a merry fellow, a guardian of the Force with a smoking hot wife. Now he's Gandalf's sensei, who's going to teach him how to wield the secret fire.
The secret fire whispers to us. If we have ears to hear, it tells us things, even shows us things. Does it show us things that will be, or things that only might be? It shows tomorrow's clouds as clear as yesterday's sunshine.
That's not how the secret fire works.
The secret fire, or the flame of Arnor, is not the Force. Essentially the power of light. It could possibly be interpreted as the Holy Spirit, which absolutely confirms that Gandalf is Gandalf. And let's just keep in mind, we're 6 episodes in to season 2, and they're still mystery boxing Gandalf's name.
Those big folk are only after us to get to him, the stranger.
And everything that's happened to Gandalf this season has led to him having to pick his staff.
The Dark Wizard found his staff, and now the time has come for you to find yours. You'll find your true staff only when the vision of your heart is single to the surface of the secret fire.
And I see what they're doing here. By the time Gandalf gets a name, a staff, and his pointy hat, it'll be the Third Age.
But wait! There's more!
It's time to repurpose a line from the books and Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings.
Somehow I know, unless I find her soon, she will die. Both of them will die.
Many that die deserve life. Some that live deserve death. Who are you to give it to them?
Now, some people might think in isolation, which it isn't, that repurposing this line from the books and the movie is harmless. I strongly disagree, not only because it's abject hackery, because of the context. Because, as most of you know from the books and the film, that's Gandalf's response to Frodo wishing Bilbo had killed Gollum, essentially wishing death on something that might seem irredeemable but might not be.
It's a pity Bilbo didn't kill him when he
Tom Bombadil responding to Dane Galf wanting his friends to live, which makes old Tom Bombadil a dick, and the writers complete morons. Meanwhile, over at Casa Doom, Sauron took the Middle-earth high-speed train to re-up on some of that mithril, and he says the word.
Or perhaps Casa Doom prefers something more precious.
Now Durin III says no because he thinks he can get a better deal out of Sauron. And after Sauron says fine, he looks at a torch and sees a Balrog to remind the audience that it's under Moria. Never mind the fact that if Sauron knew Durin's Bane was down there, the first thing he would have done is tried to recruit him. Canonically, he doesn't wake up for thousands of years, but in this show, it'll probably be next season. Anyway, after Durin IV notices that his ring is affecting Durin III like the One Ring, which it shouldn't, he asks him to take it off, and we get another repurposed line.
Take off that ring. I don't know. This line belongs to you.
It's mine.
And apparently now the Dwarven rings give them superpowers.
That's not how the rings work.
But we did get some interesting information in this episode. We find out that the first black female dwarf, Disa, who wasn't really the first black female dwarf, was abandoned by her father.
I love him as much as you do. All I know is he's the father to me my own ever was.
Now, Disa Nuts and Durin IV have decided that the dwarves are delving too greedily and too deep. And because women are taking charge this episode, it's Disa Nuts who's going to stop them. How, you ask? Like this. And I have to admit, this is a little on the nose for Amazon, even as I record this on Batman Day, because she becomes Bat-Disa, the Dark Dwarf, and Tolkien's mighty dwarves who were created by Aule to be strong, resistant to fire, and the evils of Morgoth, who were hardier than any other race, run like bitches from bats. Speaking of women taking charge, back to Guy Ladriel, who was just tricked by Adar into believing there was going to be some sort of alliance with orcs, and then she gave up all the information he needed. Now the room temperature IQ Guy Ladriel is warning Adar that he's falling into a trap and giving Sauron everything he needs, which she would know.
This is all his design. This is what Sauron wants.
For she is more fair than all the jewels beneath the earth.
Now, I totally agree with Elle Magazine that this is an episode with a theme of men needing to listen to women, but why in the hell should they in this case? Because Guy Ladriel is the woman solely responsible for all of this. And in the final scene, Sauron is able to conjure a spell to convince Grandma Brimbor to hurry up and finish those 9 rings for men to put their fingers in. Sauron makes it look like it's a nice peaceful day in Region, when in truth, it's actually night and elves are running for their lives. Now, I'm guessing this power would have come in handy in over a dozen different scenes throughout these 1.5 seasons, including when he got Caesared by a half a dozen orcs. But that's not important right now. He gives Grandma Brimbor some mithril and he's off to work. And it looks like Grandma Brimbor will be making the 9 rings for men to put their fingers in during the sack of Eregion. But shout out to the elven lookouts of Eregion for finally showing up to work and noticing the giant legions of orcs with trebuchets shooting fireballs at their city.
That escalated quickly.
Far be it from me to point out that it was Sauron who led the host out of Mordor and invaded Eriador. And this took a long time because the elves held their own for a little while, including an alliance between Elrond and this guy named Celeborn, whose name shows up in the appendices, but of course Guy Ladriel's going to take his place, so she'll have her agency. And the sack of Eregion preceded Sauron getting the Rings of Power. And the Rings of Power didn't affect the bearer until Sauron made the One Ring. And at this point, I feel bad for Sauron. He put in all this work over 500 years, and all he had to do was tell a couple of elves they look pretty, or one that he has a nice gown. He told one chick he was a king, and she just believed him. He's probably kicking himself. And yes, I'm Team Sauron now. Not that I like the character. I just couldn't care less if anyone else lives or dies. Previously on the Rings of Power.
The greatest of elven smiths is consumed by his work. He asks that I handle all matters of administration in his stead.
I'm just fatigued. You are the Lord of Eregion. You have responsibilities until the 9 are complete. Nothing else matters.
Without mithril, the remaining rings of power may never be complete.
We need more. Or perhaps Khazad-dûm prefers something more precious.
If you got that, take off then. I have nothing to prove to you, boy.
This is all his design. This is what Sauron wants.
For she is more fair than all the jewels beneath the earth.
You are so dumb. You are really dumb. For real.
I don't want to bury the lead here. How does this particular episode sink to a new low? Well, one of the shining examples is Elrond makes out with his future mother-in-law Galadriel. Oh! And Tolkien's grave just blew up again. And we'll get to the details of that, believe me. But once again, we start in Eregion, where we're still waiting for Grandma Brimbor to figure out that Anatar is Sauron. I mean, they've been so subtle about it, and yes, he's still trying to make those rings for men to put their fingers in. Sauron is now convinced all the multicultural Gen Z room temperature IQ elves of Eregion that he's in charge now. And this provides an opportunity for more repurposed dialogue.
Celebrimbor's mind is gone. We are alone.
Not alone.
You have proven your quality.
You've shown your quality, sir. Very honest.
And yes, the forging of the 9 rings for men to put their fingers in, and all these conversations are going down while Eregion is being attacked, including Modernity hanging out in the battlements while it's being firebombed. On top of that, Modernity and the rest of the elven window lickers of Eregion sit around and witness the orcs very quickly and precisely turn their trebuchets around so they can fire rocks at a cliff that dams up the river. Yet, somehow they're having trouble knocking down this wall. But while all this is going down, it allows enough time for Don Lemonless to show up and do absolutely nothing for half the episode, other than report that this is a mostly peaceful sack of Eregion. Meanwhile, back in Moria, Durin III standing behind Bat-Disa, who always needs to put her leg out for some reason, who somehow held off all the dwarven miners from Khazad-dûm when they ran like bitches from bats last episode, does it again. Now, to be fair, apparently there's only a dozen dwarven miners in all of Khazad-dûm, and there is a real danger of bats flying out of Disa's open legs. After throwing down his hammer, Narvi informs Durin that his man has returned after his walk of shame, and who could forget their last meeting from season 1?
Get me the meat and give it to me raw.
Elrond, my heart sings to see you, old friend.
You tidal-haired, flowery-tongued f***ball.
Have you any idea what I've gone through since you left?
Need your axe, old friend.
Homosexual. You know what my favorite thing about reviewing garbage television is? Sitting and watching the most idiotic character finally catch on to what the audience has known since the first episode of season 1. Halbrand and Anatar are Sauron, which technically makes him a they-them, which answers another question I had from season 1. What are Sauron's pronouns? And you know how Grandma Brimbor finally figures out he's in an illusion? Remember the Matrix?
Oh, I remember.
Except this time it's totally different because it's with a mouse. And once Grandma Brimbor figures this all out, Sauron, who still needs him, lets him go and almost gets him killed. Then he gets up and leisurely walks around Eregion while it's being attacked and throws Modernity off the battlements. Granted, he was under Sauron's power, but I still shouldn't have found this scene to be as funny as it was. This is the point where Elrond finally shows up to the Battle of Eregion. Now, how in the hell did he get here so fast from Khazad-dûm? I have no idea. And what the hell is up with those bell-end helmets? But not to worry, ladies and gentlemen, Elrond has brought a secret weapon. My producer, X-Ray Girl. They are also joined by High District Manager Gil Gadaddy.
A lovely individual called me Gil Gadaddy in a coffee shop, which I took as a huge... It made me emotional. Gil Gadaddy.
Who Elrond clearly acknowledges there, and I want you to remember that. And I can hear you now, dear viewer. Why is it Gil Galad, formidable and wise, warrior king, not leading the charge yet is still part of the battle? That would be a good question. My guess is he was added in later during reshoots and there's some more evidence of this to come, but it's hard to tell because this is some of the worst editing and directing I've seen since, well, The Acolyte. But the Velen-headed warriors of Linden are stopped in their tracks when it's revealed that the orcs have Galadriel as a prisoner. And despite all her rage, she's still just a rat back in her cage. And at this point, why not have another elven-orc parlay? Because orcs are well known for sitting around unarmed elves and not killing them. I keep forgetting that these are kinder and gentler orcs. And because people can't stop hitting on Elrond this episode, it's Adar's turn.
You have the beauty of your foremother, Melian of the Valar.
Mrs. Robinson, you're trying to seduce me.
But there is a line from Adar that I like.
If she speaks again, cut out her tongue.
The Amazon original character Adar wants the ring Nenya, which canonically no one's supposed to know about, in exchange for killing Sauron. How does Adar know about the ring Nenya and the fact that Sauron is in Eregion? Well, girl boss Galadriel took charge and told him everything. Doogie Elrond turns down Adar's offer, and the first stupid thing to happen is the orcs didn't kill the elves right away. The second stupid thing to happen is Doogie Elrond is allowed to say goodbye to Galadriel because he's unarmed, although this guy is clearly armed. The third stupid thing to happen is Elrond asks for Galadriel's forgiveness because he's leaving her to die. There's absolutely nothing to forgive because everything is Galadriel's fault. Oh, honorable mention of stupidity. Where in the hell is High King Gil-galad during this parlay? This is followed by what can be best described as nothing short of a creative atrocity. The worst crime against imagination. The worst atrocity against the beloved professor's work in this cesspool of a show. Jeff Bezos got his Game of Thrones, and he got it, minus all the cultural impact, the notoriety, and viewers. But it did cost more. Am I surprised that the show that took one of the best female characters from Tolkien and turned her into a man-spreading moron, or took the embodiment of evil and turned him into a thirst trap would do something like this? Actually, yes. Put simply, this is an indefensible, perverted, and subversive act against everything the professor believed and wrote. And not that this show ever had a prayer, there's no coming back from this one. And I'm really looking forward to the scholars and Tolkien professors who are going to run out there and try to defend this. I look forward to all their honest reviews in about a year. I mean, canonically, this would make for some awkward dinners in Lorien and Rivendell, but to be fair, this actually does bring to mind a couple of alternate deleted scenes from Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings.
I want you to know that tonight I am going to pleasure myself to the image of you doing that. I'm going to roll you into a little ball and shove you up my vagina. You just live there.
Arwen, Tommy.
Anyway, after the kinder and gentler orcs decided to let Doogie Elrond leave after their parlay, Doogie Elrond goes on to kill some orcs, including putting one in a trebuchet and then firing it on his own city, Eregion. This is followed by the only character I actually care about in this show dying, Doogie Elrond's horse, all within a show known for actually killing them. And this is where things get really stupid. I mean, the battle scenes are just embarrassing. Everything's a mess. You have no idea how many orcs or elves there are. You don't know where anybody is. I don't know what the hell this guy got hit by. And then we get this line from an orc. And if you guys were worried about Galadriel, of course she was able to escape in her very clever disguise of a robe with her blonde hair hanging out walking through an orc camp. And while your guess would be the same as mine, she is obviously going to save herself. No! She's saved by Deus Ex Don Lemonless, who's been hanging around for a couple of days not doing much of anything other than waiting to save Galadriel. And the rest of the episode turns into a fever dream. We finally get to see the troll based on Mike Ehrmantraut from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, and then he dies by the hands of Doogie Elrond, Don Lemonless, and High King Gil-galad, who Elrond is surprised to see.
Commander! High King! Should not be here! The king's place is wherever the need is greatest.
Which he shouldn't be, because he clearly acknowledged him right before his charge on Adar's forces. And if the feared warrior High King Gil-galad wasn't supposed to be at this battle, what the hell was he doing at the last one? There was a lot of gaffes this episode. So much, I didn't catch them all, but that's why we have the internet. Including, but not limited to, Adar stating Elrond's foremother, Melian, is of the Valar.
You have the beauty of your foremother, Marianne of the Valor.
When a simple Google search will tell you she's Maya. They also had a little trouble spelling Middle Earth and remembering what a Region looked like. To be fair, keeping track of continuity is expensive, and Amazon only had a budget of $1 billion. And this episode marks the passing of our beloved diverse elf, Rianne Johnson, played by X-Ray Girl. It's like we hardly knew her. But she goes out like Boromir after getting a shot off like Bronn from Game of Thrones. Now back in Region, Sauron finds time to share a little bit about his past to Celebrimbor, making it sound like he got diddled by Morgoth or Melkor, or according to the geek website Screen Rant, Melkoth.
You must know it pains. Treating me
like you've treated countless others.
like Morgoth treated me. Sometimes pain almost became all. Came again.
Ugh. Anyway, after Sauron finishes sharing his past trauma, he leaves, and Celebrimbor, instead of using this tool to maybe, I don't know, cut his chains, decides to cut off his thumb to escape, who's saved by Guy Ladriel, who just magically shows up, and now all the elves of Region like Grandma Brimbor again because Guy Ladriel told them to. Anyway, both of them apologize to each other for completely screwing up Simple Earth when Amazon should be apologizing to anyone who watched this. Then Celebrimbor, who canonically should be in Region, gives Galadriel, who canonically should not be in Region, the 9 rings for men, which canonically Galadriel never touched, to keep them from Sauron, who canonically shouldn't be in Region. And when Grandma Brimbor brings some elves to go and confront Sauron, he uses his power to get the elves to kill themselves, and man, that would have come in handy when he was getting Caesared by half a dozen orcs. Now, when Doogie Elrond took the high-speed Middle-earth rail to Khazad-dûm to go meet his boyfriend Durin III, he was asking for an army, and they were supposed to come at first light, just like the Two Towers. And in an inverted scene from the Two Towers,
The dwarves! The dwarves are coming! Look to the north!
they don't show up because apparently now Durin III is killing his own people.
Your father, the terribly dark sun they made, cut through them like stalks of wheat.
And it looks like the dwarves of Moria are completely aware of the Balrog.
He's gonna make it, gonna use that beast. Riddles of your stupidity.
And now all seems lost for the 9 elves left in Region. After that, Adar guts Don Lemonless, and we've lost 2 elves of color this episode, Amazon, you bigots. And then Adar, who I have to admit, even though it's an Amazon original creation, the character's starting to grow on me, gets the ring Nenya that canonically Elrond is never supposed to have. And although I would love to play this, but I can't because of the copyright gods, and believe me, you'll be thanking me if you ever heard it, they roll the credits with Cookie Monster metal.
First thing to specify is that there's no such thing really as canon in Tolkien.
The canons of narrative in any medium cannot be wholly different, and the failure of poor films is often precisely an exaggeration, and in the intrusion of unwarranted matter owing to not perceiving where the core of the original lies.
I have no right to ask this of any of you. Will you follow me? One last time.
Previously on Rings of Power.
Let the half-hoods be your sole concern. I will see to the Eastar myself.
Dark Wizard found his staff, and now the time has come for you to find yours.
There's something under the rings.
Trust gains the ability to sculpt their very boots.
The High King believes they may be vulnerable to deception.
No shit.
This is all his design. This is what Sauron wants. You forget your bling bling.
forgotten to mention that the finale is incredibly dumb, and it doesn't waste any time. Let's get straight to the stupid. We open up in Khazad-dûm with Durin versus Durin. Durin demands Durin take off the ring, then Durin cries. Then Durin digs too greedily and too deep by himself. After that, Durin calls over Durin to check out the cavern full of mithril he just found and something else. Remember the Balrog from Lord of the Rings? And even though canonically, and I'm looking at you, Tolkien professor, the Balrog shouldn't show up for thousands of years, he's here. Oh, I'm sorry, this is the Rings of Power I'm talking about. She's here. This is the point where the Rings of Power exemplifies why canonically there's only one Durin at a time.
Durin!
I mean, is Durin asking for help from Durin, or is Durin just yelling at Durin? I don't know. Anyway, Durin looks on as Durin decides to self-delete by attacking the Balrog that Amazon obviously licensed from Warner Brothers. I can hear you now, dear viewer. Why did Durin do this? It's completely pointless. It's not like it's going to buy anybody any time, and you'd be right. So now I have a couple of questions for you, dear viewer. What do you think happens next? The Balrog licensed from Warner Brothers destroys Khazad-dûm and kills every dwarf in it, or the Rings of Power rolls its opening credits and we never see the Balrog again. If you guessed the latter, you unfortunately have watched the Rings of Power. But we did get an explanation from showrunners J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay why the Balrog just goes back to sleep and doesn't bother anybody in Khazad-dûm for thousands of years. Because the fall of Khazad-dûm and the Balrog are an allegory, and we know how much the professor liked those, of climate change. When asked by the Hollywood Reporter why the Balrog just didn't destroy Khazad-dûm right there and then, McKay responds, this is the thing where, how do societies fall? Usually it's gradual, and then all at once. If you want to use climate change as a metaphor, climate change is not an event. Climate change is a process that ebbs and flows.
You gotta be fucking kidding.
There are a few storylines that the showrunners decided to mop up in the finale, and I'm going to go over them with the same care they did. But I want to give the showrunners credit. If they are going to truncate the entire Second Age into a shorter timeline and include the events of Numenor, which canonically, Tolkien professor, take place well over 1,000 years after the events of Region, it takes a certain commitment to incompetence to take Isildur, the man who cut the ring from Sauron's hand, and turn him into a supporting character, with less screen time than the Amazon original characters female Sam, female Frodo, or modernity. And all he does is bond with Theo after he's abandoned by his surrogate father Don Lemonless, saw that one coming. Makes out with the married Tolkien in Tolkien, and then fucks off to Numenor after finding out his father's a traitor and Ar-Pharazôn is the king. Speaking of Numenor, after Ar-Pharazôn is chosen as king because an eagle landed next to him, his throne is now threatened because Miriel gets spit out by a white sea worm, and yes, this is the same Miriel that's described in Tolkien's Legendarium as being fairer than ivory, pearls, or silver. And although the elves had a hard time getting a message in and out of Lindon or Region, one made it to Westerness.
We have learned why Miriel was able to bewitch the sea.
And Ar-Pharazôn has branded Miriel and her faithful as traitors for being in league with Sauron. And after fucking up the lore beyond all recognition so they can give Miriel some agency, all in effort to remove the mighty Elendil's agency. First he's saved by his daughter, an Amazon original character with a nice rack, who for the life of me I can't remember her name. And all this is done so Miriel can send the mighty Elendil on his path. She even gives him Narsil of the shards of Narsil, you know, the blade that cut the ring from Sauron's hand, in another repurposed scene.
It is called Narsil.
The White Flag.
You claim your lordship, and with this sword, destiny.
Underrated the flame of the West, forged from the shards of Narsil. Sauron would have forgotten the sword of
Elendil rides off into exile and Miriel gets arrested, and thus ends this installment of The Númenórean and the Restless. You know, we haven't heard from the Dark Wizard, female Sam, female Frodo, or Gandalf in a while, so let's get this one over with. There is some good news, though. We finally get the big payoff that they've been setting up for over 2 seasons that absolutely everyone saw coming. All while setting up another obvious mystery that will have 5s and 10s of people talking about it until season 3 comes out in 2026. Gandalf finally reunites with the Harfoots and the the Stores, and confronts the Dark Wizard, who confirms he's one of the 5 wizards who are not supposed to show up until 1,000 years into the Third Age.
We are kin, 5 of us. They're bad.
Not to get too far in the weeds, but he could be one of the blue wizards, but I think it's far more likely that he's going to be another. After the Dark Wizard kills one of the bad guys from Furiosa, he claims not to be a Dark Wizard and asks Dangalf to join him, but when he refuses, the Dark Wizard decides to show how bad things will be under Sauron by killing all the Harfoots and the Stools. I'm sorry, the Stewards. I'm starting to like this guy. Dangalf pulls a Ray Palpatine and saves all the Harfoots and the Stools. I'm sorry, Stewards. Except for this one, the Dark Wizard fucks off and says, we'll meet again someday, and I half expected someone to say, what a sour man. It's way too soon, though. That scene will probably happen in season 3 or 4. But if you think that sounds stupid, just wait, because we do get Dangalf's name in the most cringe way possible.
Don't be a stranger now.
No, God!
Thank you kindly, Grandel.
No, God, please, no! No!
My Grandel.
No!
Gandalf.
No!
And I'm still going to call him Dangalf. So, he finds his stick, he gets his name, he goes back to Jedi Master Bombadil, and it's time for some more repurposed dialogue from Harry Potter.
The wizard does not find its staff. It finds him.
The one chooses the wizard, Mr. Potter.
But we did get a line from female Sam that unintentionally describes the state of this show perfectly.
Some things can't be fixed. Some things last are lost forever. Because this world's so much bigger than any of us. We've just got to accept it. What's broke is broke. And won't fix.
And there's some potential good news or bad news. They separate Dangalf from female Sam and female Frodo, so they could be writing the Harfoots and the Stewards out of the story, or giving them their own. Considering what they did this season, which was absolutely nothing, I'm leaning towards being written out of the story. Either way,
I don't care.
So let's check in on one of the multiple ships from this show, Sauron Brimbor. And just in case you think I'm being a bit hyperbolic, the Rings of Power creators on that big season 2 finale reveal and Sauron's mistake, from the Stranger's identity reveal to Galadriel's fight and whether Sauron and Celebrimbor were lovers.
Oh, fuck off!
While Sauron is using Grandma Brimbor as a pincushion and torturing him, he brings up the fall of Gondolin.
Have you ever seen orcs in heat of combat? The frenzy comes over them, blood hunger. Gondolin fell. They say it went on for weeks.
Keep Gondolin's name out your fucking mouth!
Want to know more about it? Read the book. It's fucking awesome. And it should be no surprise Amazon completely fucks up the tragic end of Celebrimbor. Canonically, his dead body is used by Sauron as a battle standard. In the Rings of Power, Grandma Brimbor goads Sauron into skewering him by spoiling the end of Lord of the Rings.
The rings of power shall destroy him, and in the end, I foresee one alone shall prove your utter ruin.
In his final words, I shit you not, are calling Sauron the Lord of the Rings.
I must blood. Lord of the Rings.
What is this, amateur hour? But wait! There's more!
This is followed by Sauron crying. Again.
Are you him? Are you Sauron? I have many names.
Yeah, and I guess one of them is Pussy. The last time we saw Galadriel, she was given the 9 rings for men to put their fingers in to get as far away from Eregion as possible. But when we catch up with our warrior of the wasteland, elven commander, slayer of orcs, girl boss, girl Barian, her dumbass is back in Eregion. So they can show her saving some women and little girls, because men and boys don't matter. I mean, how do you expect me to believe that little 5'4" Morphin Clark is gonna save anyone? Just a reminder, Galadriel is supposed to be 6'4". Anyway, they run into some orcs and Galadriel gives herself up and offers up the 9 rings for men to put their fingers in, as long as the orcs spare the women and little girls. At this point, the only thing the orcs should be saying is,
Let's kill her!
and everybody else and rip the rings off her dead body. Instead, the kinder and gentler orcs honor the deal and take her to Adar, who already has Nenya. And despite the ring Nenya healing Adar because Galadriel is so wonderful, he gives it back. Once again, he offers her an alliance, and this time, Galadriel is going to accept.
Let this ring heal the rift between us and us.
What?
This is followed by one of the dumbest exchanges in one of the dumbest shows ever made, and the worst misrepresentation of an adapted character in history.
Help me vanquish Sauron, and I swear to you, I will recall my children to Mordor, never to make war on Middle-earth again.
What? I have slain more of your children than any elf alive.
What the fuck? Far be it from me to point out that the Lady of Light is about to ally herself with the elf who committed genocide in the south and just sacked Arregion. But not to worry, because the alliance doesn't last long. You remember Gloob, the hard torturing and pillaging orc who just wants to provide for his family, betrays Adar. And then he gets Caesared as Sauron looks on. And what does Galadriel do? Does she A, honor the sacrifice Celebrimbor made for her and run away as far as she can, considering she has the ring Nenya, the 9 rings for men to put their fingers in, and nobody's paying attention to her? Or B, stand around like an idiot so we can set up some stupid fight between her and Sauron? If you guessed the latter, unfortunately, you have watched the Rings of Power. Meanwhile, back in Arregion, the battle is over. Sauron has ordered all but the commanders be killed, so what the hell is Don Lemlis doing there? And didn't he get shanked a couple of times last episode and was left dying? Well, it looks like he found a healing elixir that fixed his armor. Somehow, High District Manager Gil-Gadady, who canonically stood toe-to-toe with the real Sauron, finds himself in an orc's chokehold. And Doogie Elrond looks on as the orcs represent Jeff Bezos' treatment of the professor's work. And wouldn't you know it, they're saved by Deus Ex dwarves. I guess that Balrog was
barely an inconvenience.
And now, the moment we've all been waiting for, the battle of the Second Age. In this corner, weighing in at 105 pounds with her armor on, she's slain more orcs than any elf alive. The Lady of Fight, Galadriel. In the opposite corner, her opponent, can she change him? The Master of Wigs and the Dark Lord who feels really bad about it, Sensitive Sauron. Eventually, Sauron gets the best of Galadriel, and this is my favorite scene in the entire series. Now, never mind the fact, despite the Tolkien professor saying canon doesn't exist, canonically, Sauron never got near any of the elven rings. He's close to one now, and he was able to take the 9 rings for men to put their fingers in. And considering Sauron just shanked Galadriel with Morgoth's pinky ring, you may ask yourself, why doesn't he just cut the ring from her hand like Isildur does to him later? Nope, for some reason he needs her consent, and he doesn't get it. Instead, Galadriel in this show fall off a cliff. That's about 2,000 or 3,000 feet high, and she lands like Wile E. Coyote. God, I can't take this stupidity anymore. Let's just get it over with. The dwarves aren't bothered by the Balrog anymore, but they have some politics to deal with. Sauron fucks off with the 9 rings for men to put their fingers in. Of course, Galadriel isn't smashed into jelly, and Doogie Elrond heals her with Nenya, and we find out why. After getting their asses thoroughly kicked by the orcs, the 3 men needed to ask the woman who caused all this mess by not telling anybody Halbrand was Sauron what to do next.
Of course, would you advise? Come on to Galadriel. You can talk to me, you know, I'm standing right here.
And apparently her genius idea was to have High District Manager Gil-Gadady put his sword up in the air. That's it. So that wraps it up for the Rings of Power Season 2, where we got to see Isildur cry, Miriel cry, Elendil cry, Celebrimbor cry, Elrond cry, Galadriel cry, female Sam cry, female Frodo cry, Durin cry, Disa cry, and Sauron cry. Twice. Galadriel, Sauronbrimbor, Elrondriel, Elendil, Isildur, and Tolkien, and female Sam and Buckwheat. But at least that's not as bad as falling around Dangalf while he spends 2 seasons trying to find a stick in his name, or watching Doogie Elrond make out with his future mother-in-law. But at least we got the answer to the biggest question of them all.
So many of us in the LGBT community see ourselves in Tolkien's writings. Any chance we see ourselves on the show?
He's not here, is he? As a matter of fact, he is.
Thus ends another abysmal season of the worst adaptation of a literary work of all time. A subversive, systematic, deliberate dismantling of the professor's work to reflect the Los Angeles they live in today. The only questions I have left are, who are they going to ship Galadriel with next? Maybe your husband, Celeborn. And when are they going to show the Dwarven, Elven, and Hobbit genocide? And maybe we'll get the answers to these questions when the series ends in 2030. But I'll give them credit for this. The all-female directors they had for this season proved that women can suck as much as men. So we'll end with some unsolicited advice for Jeff Bezos. You took on the Tolkien fandom, and it was an embarrassing loss. So here's what you do. Fire everybody and anybody involved with this show above crew levels.
And pestilence. But even less significant events have their own horsemen. For example, the 4 horsemen of the common cold are sniffles, chesty, nostril, and lack of tissues. The 4 horsemen whose appearance foreshadows any public holiday are storm, gales, sleet, and contraflow. Among the armies encamped in the broad alluvial plain around Hung Hung, the invisible horsemen known as misinformation, rumour, and gossip saddled up. A large army encamped has all the tedious problems of a city without any of the advantages. Its watchfires and picket lines are, after a while, open to local civilians, especially if they have anything to sell, and even more so if they are women whose virtue has a certain commercial element, and even sometimes if they appear to be selling food which is a break from the monotonous army diet. The food currently on sale was certainly such a break. Pork balls, get them while they... There was a pause as the vendor mentally tried out ways of ending the sentence and gave up. Pork balls, on a stick. How about you, Chauvin? You look like... Here, aren't you the... Shut up. Rincewind pulled D.M.H. Dibala into the shadows by a tent. The trader looked at the anguished face, framed between a eunuch outfit and a big straw hat. It's the wizard, isn't it? How are you? You know how you seriously wanted to become very rich in international trade? Rincewind said. Yes, can we start? Soon, but there's something you must do. You know this rumour about the army of invisible vampire ghosts that's heading this way? D.M.H. Dibala's eyes swiveled nervously, but it was part of his stock in trade never to appear to be ignorant of anything except, perhaps, how to give correct change. Yes, he said. The one about there being millions of them, said Rincewind, and very hungry on account of not having eaten on the way, and made specially fierce by the great wizard. Yes? Well, it's not true. It's not. You don't believe me? After all, I ought to know. Good point. And we don't want people to panic, do we? Very bad for business, panic, said D.M.H., nodding uncomfortably. So make sure you tell people there's no truth in this rumour, will you? Set their minds at rest. Good idea. These invisible vampire ghosts, do they carry money of any sort? No, because they don't exist. Ah, yes, I forgot. And there are not 2,300,009 of them, said Rincewind. He was rather proud of this little detail. Not 2,300,009 of them, said D.M.H., a little glassy-eyed. Absolutely not. There are not 2,300,009 of them, no matter what anyone says, nor has the great wizard made them twice as big as normal. Good man. Now, I'd better be off. Rincewind hurried away. The trader stood in thought for a while. It stole over him that he'd probably sold enough things for now, and he might as well go home and spend a quiet night in a barrel in the root cellar with a sack over his head. His route led him through quite a large part of the camp. He made sure that soldiers he met knew there was no truth in the rumour, even though this invariably meant that, first of all, he had to tell them what the rumour actually was.
Toby, die.
A toy rabbit squeaked nervously. And I'm afraid of the big invisible vampire ghosts, sobbed Favourite Pearl. The soldiers around this particular campfire tried to comfort her, but unfortunately there was no one to comfort them. And I heard they already ate some men. One or two soldiers looked over their shoulders. There was nothing to be seen in the darkness. This wasn't, however, a reassuring sign. The Red Army moved obliquely from campfire to campfire. Rincewind had been very specific. He'd spent all his adult life, at least those parts of it where he wasn't being chased by things with more legs than teeth, in unseen university, and he felt he knew what he was talking about here. Don't tell people anything, he said. Don't tell them. You didn't get to survive as a wizard in UU by believing what people told you. You believed what you were not told. Don't tell them. Ask them. Ask them if it's true. You can beg them to tell you it's not true, or you can even tell them you've been told to tell them it's not true, and that is the best of all. Because Rincewind knew very well that when the 4 rather small and nasty horsemen of panic ride out, there is a good job done by misinformation, rumour and gossip, but they are as nothing compared to the 4th horseman, whose name is denial. After an hour, Rincewind felt quite unnecessary. There were conversations breaking out everywhere, particularly in those areas on the edge of the camps, where the night stretched away so big and dark and so very obviously empty. All right, so how come they're saying there's not 2,300,009 of them, eh? If there's none of them, then why is there a number? Look, there's no such thing as invisible vampire ghosts, all right? Oh yeah? How do you know? Have you ever seen any? Listen, I went and asked the captain and he says he's certain there's no invisible ghosts out there. How can he be certain if he can't see them? He says there's no such thing as invisible vampire ghosts at all. Oh? How come he's saying that all of a sudden? My grandfather told me there's millions of them outside the... Hold on. Hold on. What's out there? What? Could have sworn I heard something. I can't see anything. Oh, no. Things must have filtered through to the high command, because getting on towards midnight, trumpets were sounded around the camps and a special proclamation was read out. It confirmed the reality of vampire ghosts in general, but denied their existence in any specific here and now sense. It was a masterpiece of its type, particularly since it brought the whole subject to the ears of soldiers the Red Army hadn't been able to reach yet. An hour later, the situation had reached the point of criticality, and Rincewind was hearing things he personally hadn't made up, and, on the whole, would much rather not hear. He'd chat with a couple of soldiers and say, I'm sure there's no huge, hungry army of vampire ghosts, and get told, no, there's 7 old men. Just 7 old men? I've heard they're very old, said a soldier, like too old to die. I heard from someone at the palace that they can walk through walls and make themselves invisible. Oh, come on, said Rincewind. 7 old men fighting this whole army? Makes you think, eh? Corporal Toshi says the great wizard is helping them. Stands to reason. I wouldn't be fighting a whole army if I didn't have a lot of magic on my side. Anyone know what this great wizard looks like? Said Rincewind. They say he's taller than a house and got 3 heads. Rincewind nodded encouragingly. I heard, said a soldier, that the Red Army is going to fight on their side too. So what? Corporal Toshi says they're just a bunch of kids. No, I heard the real Red Army, you know. The Red Army ain't going to side with the barbarian invaders. Anyway, there's no such thing as the Red Army, they're just a myth. Like the invisible vampire ghosts, said Rincewind, giving the clockwork of anxiety another little turn. Yeah. He left them arguing. No one was deserting. Running off into a night full of non-specific terrors was worse than staying in camp. But that was all to the good, he decided. It meant that the really frightened people were staying put and seeking reassurance from their comrades. And there was nothing like someone repeating, I'm sure there's no vampire wizards, and going to the latrine 4 times an hour to put backbone into a platoon. Rincewind crept back towards the city, round a tent in the shadows, and collided with a horse, which trod heavily on his foot. Your wife is a big hippo. Sorry. Rincewind froze, both hands clutching his aching foot. He knew only one person with a voice like a cemetery in midwinter. He tried to hop backwards and collided with another horse.
Rincewind, isn't it?
Said Death.
Yes. Good evening. I don't believe you have met war. Rincewind, war. War, Rincewind.
War touched his helmet in salute. Pleasure's all mine, he said. He indicated the other 3 riders. Like to introduce you to my sons, Terror and Panic, and my daughter, Clancy. The children chorused a hello. Clancy was scowling, looking about 7 years old, and was wearing a hard hat and a pony club badge.
I wasn't expecting to see you here, Rincewind.
Oh, good. Death pulled an hourglass out of his robe, held it up to the moonlight and sighed. Rincewind craned to see how much sand was left.
However, I could.
Don't you make any special arrangement just on my account, said Rincewind hurriedly. I expect you're all here for the battle?
Yes, it promises to be extremely short.
Who's going to win?
Now, you know I wouldn't tell you that, even if I knew.
Even if you knew, said Rincewind. I thought you were supposed to know everything. Death held up a finger. Something fluttered down through the night. Rincewind thought it was a moth, although it looked less fluffy and had a strange speckled pattern on its wings. It settled on the extended digit for a moment, and then flew up and away again.
On a night like this, said Death, the only certain thing is uncertainty. Trite, I know, but true.
Somewhere on the horizon, thunder rumbled. I'll, just be sort of going then, said Rincewind.
Don't be a stranger,
said Death, as the wizard hurried off.
Odd person,
said War.
With him here, even uncertainty is uncertain. And I'm not sure even about that.
War pulled a large paper-wrapped package out of his saddlebag. We've got, let's see now, egg and cress, chicken tikka, and mature cheese with crunchy pickle, I think.
They do such marvellous things with sandwiches these days.
Oh, and bacon surprise.
Really? What is so surprising about bacon?
I don't know. I suppose it comes as something of a shock to the pig. Ridcully had been having a long wrestle with himself, and had won. We're going to bring him back, he said. It's been 4 days, and then we can send them back their bloody tube thing. It gives me the willies. The senior wizards looked at one another. No one was very keen on a university with a Rincewind component, but the metal dog did give them the willies. No one had wanted to go near it. They piled some tables around it and tried to pretend it wasn't there. All right, said the Dean, but Stibbons kept going on about things weighing the same, right? If we send that back, won't it mean Rincewind arrives here going very fast? Mr. Stibbons says he's working on the spell, said Ridcully. Or we could pile some mattresses up at one end of the hall, or something. The bursar raised a hand. Yes, bursar, said Ridcully encouragingly. Oh, landlord, a pint of your finest ale, said the bursar. Good, said Ridcully. That's settled then. I've already told Mr. Stibbons to start looking.
On that demonic device?
Yes.
Then nothing can possibly go wrong, said the Dean sourly.
A trumpet of lobsters, if you'd be so good.
And the bursar agreed.
The warlords had gathered in Lord Hong's chambers. They carefully kept a distance from one another, as befitted enemies who were in the most shaky of alliances. Once the barbarians were dealt with, the battle might still continue, but they wanted assurance on one particular point. No, said Lord Hong. Let me make this absolutely clear. There is no invisible army of blood-sucking ghosts, do you understand? The people beyond the wall are just like us, except vastly inferior in every respect, of course, but totally visible. One or two of the lords did not look convinced. And all this talk about the Red Army, said one of them. The Red Army, Lord Tang, is an undisciplined rabble that shall be put down with resolute force. You know what the Red Army and the peasants are talking about, said Lord Tang. They say that thousands of years ago They say that thousands of years ago, a wizard who did not exist took mud and lightning and made soldiers that couldn't die, said Lord Hong. Yes, it's a story, Lord Tang. A story made up by peasants who did not understand what really happened. One Sun Mirror's army just had... Lord Hong waved a hand vaguely. Better armor, better discipline. I'm not frightened of ghosts, and I'm certainly not afraid of a legend that probably never existed. Yes, but soothsayer, snapped Lord Hong. The soothsayer, who hadn't been expecting it, gave a start.
Yes, my lord.
How are those entrails coming along?
They're about ready, my lord,
said the soothsayer. The soothsayer was rather worried. This must have been the wrong kind of bird, he told himself. About the only thing the entrails were telling him was that if he got out of this alive, he, the soothsayer, might be lucky enough to enjoy a nice chicken dinner. But Lord Hong sounded like a man with the most dangerous kind of impatience. And what do they tell you?
The future is, the future is...
Chicken entrails had never looked like this. For a moment he thought they were moving.
It is uncertain,
he hazarded.
Be certain,
said Lord Hong.
Who will win in the morning?
Shadows flickered across the table. Something was fluttering around the light. It looked like an undistinguished yellow moth with black patterns on its wings. The soothsayer's precognitive abilities, which were considerably more powerful than he believed, told him, this is not a good time to be a clairvoyant. On the other hand, there was never a good time to be horribly executed, so,
without a shadow of a doubt, he said, the enemy will be most emphatically beaten.
How can you be so certain? Said Lord McSweeney. The soothsayer bridled.
Well, you see this wobbly bit near the kidneys? You want to argue with this green trickly thing? You know all about liver suddenly, all right?
So, there you are,
said Lord Hong.
Fate smiles upon us.
Even so, Lord Tang began. The men are very...
You can tell the men,
Lord Hong began. He stopped. He smiled.
You can tell the men, he said, that there is a huge army of invisible vampire ghosts.
What?
Yes.
Lord Hong began to stride up and down, snapping his fingers.
Yes, there is a terrible army of foreign ghosts, and this has so enraged our own ghosts. Yes, 1,000 generations of our ancestors are riding on the wind to repel this barbaric invasion. The ghosts of the Empire are arising. Millions and millions of them. Even our demons are furious at this intrusion. They will descend like a mist of claws and teeth to... Yes, Lord Sung?
The warlords were looking at one another nervously. Are you sure, Lord Hong? Lord Hong's eyes gleamed behind his tiny spectacles.
Make the necessary proclamations,
he said.
But only a few hours ago we told the men there were no. Tell them differently. But will they believe that they will believe what they are told,
shouted Lord Hong.
If the enemy thinks his strength lies in deceit, then we will use their deceit against them. Tell the men that behind them will be 1 billion ghosts of the Empire.
The other warlords tried to avoid his gaze. No one was actually going to suggest that your average soldier would not be totally happy with ghosts front and rear, especially given the capriciousness of ghosts.
Good,
said Lord Hong. He looked down.
Are you still here?
Just clearing up my giblets, my lord,
squealed the soothsayer. He picked up the remains of his stricken chicken and ran for it. After all, he told himself as he pelted back home, it's not as though I said, whose enemy? Lord Hong was left alone. He realized he was shaking. It was probably fury, but perhaps things could be turned to his advantage even so. Barbarians came from outside, and to most people everywhere, outside was the same. Yes, the barbarians were a minute detail, easily disposed of, but carefully managed perhaps might figure in his overall strategy. He was breathing heavily too. He walked into his private study and shut the door. He pulled out the key. He opened the box. There was a few minutes' silence, except for the rustle of cloth. Then Lord Hong looked at himself in the mirror. He'd gone to great lengths to achieve this. He had used several agents, none of whom knew the whole plan, but the Ankh-Morpork tailor had been good at his work, and the measurements had been followed exactly. From pointy boots to hose to doublet, cloak and hat with a feather in it, Lord Hong knew he was a perfect Ankh-Morpork gentleman. The cloak was lined with silk. The clothes felt uncomfortable and touched him in unfamiliar ways, but those were minor details. This was how a man looked in a society that breathed, that moved, that could go somewhere. He'd walk through the city on that first great day, and the people would be silent when they saw their natural leader. It never crossed his mind that anyone would say, "Here, what a tough! Heave off a brick at him." The ants scurried. The thing that went parp went parp. The wizards stood back. There wasn't much else to do when Hex was working at full speed, except watch the fish and oil the wheels from time to time. There were occasional flashes of octarine from the tubes. Hex was spelling several hundred times a minute. It was as simple as that. It would take a human more than an hour to do an ordinary finding spell, but Hex could do them faster, over and over again. It was netting the whole occult sea in the search of one slippery fish. It achieved, after 93 minutes, what would otherwise have taken the faculty several months. "You see," said Ponder, his voice shaking a little as he took the line of blocks out of the hopper. "I said he could do it." "Who's he?" said Ridcully. "Hex." "Oh, you mean it?" "That's what I said, sir. Yes." Another thing about the Horde, Mr. Savaloy had noticed, was their ability to relax. The old men had the cat-like ability to do nothing when there was nothing to do. They'd sharpened their swords, they'd had a meal, big lumps of meat for most of them, and some kind of gruel for Mad Hamish, who dribbled most of it down his beard, and assured its wholesomeness by dragging the cook in, nailing him to the floor by his apron, and suspending a large axe on a rope that crossed a beam in the roof and was held at the other end by Cohen while he ate. Then they sharpened their swords again, out of habit, and stopped. Occasionally one of them would whistle a snatch of a tune through what remained of his teeth, or search a bodily crevice for a particularly fretful louse. Mainly, though, they just sat and stared at nothing. After a long while, Caleb said, "You know, I've never been to XXXX. Been everywhere else. Often wondered what it's like." "Got shipwrecked there once," said Vincent. "Weird place. Lousy with magic. There's beavers with beaks and giant rats with long tails that hops around the place and boxes with one another. Black fellas wandering around all over the place. They say they're in a dream. Bright, though. Show 'em a bit of desert with one dead tree in it. Next minute they found a 3-course meal with fruits and nuts to follow. Beer's good, too." "Sounds like it." There was another long pause. Then, "I suppose they've got minstrels here? Be a bit of a bloody waste, wouldn't it, if we all got killed and no one made up any songs about it? Bound to have loads of minstrels, a city like this." "No problem there, then?" No. There was another lengthy pause. "Not that we're going to get killed." "Right. I don't intend to start getting killed at my time of life." Another pause. "Cohen?" "Yep." "You a religious man at all?" "Well, I've robbed lots of temples and killed a few mad priests in my time. Don't know if that counts." "What do your tribe believe happens to you when you die in battle?" "Oh, these big fat women in horned helmets take you off to the halls of Io, where there is fighting and carousing and quaffing forever." Another pause. "You mean like, really forever?" "Suppose so. 'Cause generally you get fed up even with turkey by about day 4. "All right. What do you lot believe?" "I think we go off to hell in a boat made of toenail clippings." "It's something like that, anyway." Another long pause. "But it's not worth talking about, because we're not going to get killed today." "You said it. It's not worth dying if all you've got to look forward to is leftover meat and floating around in a boat smelling of your socks, is it, eh?" Another pause. "Down in Clutch, they believe if you lead a good life, Your rewards are agreed. The warlords had gathered in Lord Hong's chambers. They carefully kept a distance from one another, as befitted enemies who...
Yes!
Lord Hong began to stride up and down, snapping his fingers.
Yes, there is a terrible army of foreign ghosts, and this has so enraged our own ghosts. Yes, 1,000 generations of our ancestors are riding on the wind to repel this barbaric invasion. The ghosts of the Empire are arising. Millions and millions of them. Even our demons are furious at this intrusion. They will descend like a mist of claws and teeth to... Yes, Lord Song?
The warlords were looking at one another nervously. Are you sure, Lord Hong? Lord Hong's eyes gleamed behind his tiny spectacles.
Make the necessary proclamations,
he said.
But only a few hours ago, we told the men there were no. Tell them differently.
But will they believe that they...
They will believe what they are told,
shouted Lord Hong.
If the enemy thinks his strength lies in deceit, then we will use their deceit against them. Tell the men that behind them will be 1 billion ghosts of the Empire.
The other warlords tried to avoid his gaze. No one was actually going to suggest that your average soldier would not be totally happy with ghosts front and rear, especially given the capriciousness of ghosts. Good, said Lord Hong. He looked down.
Are you still here?
Just clearing up my giblets, my lord, squealed the soothsayer. He picked up the remains of his stricken chicken and ran for it. After all, he told himself as he pelted back home, it's not as though I said, whose enemy? Lord Hong was left alone. He realized he was shaking. It was probably fury, but perhaps things could be turned to his advantage even so. Barbarians came from outside, and to most people everywhere, outside was the same. Yes, the barbarians were a minute detail, easily disposed of, but carefully managed perhaps might figure in his overall strategy. He was breathing heavily too. He walked into his private study and shut the door. He pulled out the key. He opened the box. There was a few minutes' silence, except for the rustle of cloth. Then Lord Hong looked at himself in the mirror. He had gone to great lengths to achieve this. He had used several agents, none of whom knew the whole plan, but the Ankh-Morpork tailor had been good at his work, and the measurements had been followed exactly. From pointy boots to hose to doublet, cloak and hat with a feather in it, Lord Hong knew he was a perfect Ankh-Morpork gentleman. The cloak was lined with silk. The clothes felt uncomfortable and touched him in unfamiliar ways, but those were minor details. This was how a man looked in a society that breathed, that moved, that could go somewhere. He'd walk through the city on that first great day, and the people would be silent when they saw their natural leader. It never crossed his mind that anyone would say, "Here, what a tough, heave off a brick at him." The ants scurried. The thing that went parp went parp. The wizards stood back. There wasn't much else to do when Hex was working at full speed, except wash the fish and oil the wheels from time to time. There were occasional flashes of octarine from the tubes. Hex was spelling several hundred times a minute. It was as simple as that. It would take a human more than an hour to do an ordinary finding spell, but Hex could do them faster, over and over again. It was netting the whole occult sea in the search of one slippery fish. It achieved, after 93 minutes, what would otherwise have taken the faculty several months. "You see," said Ponder, his voice shaking a little as he took the line of blocks out of the hopper. "I said he could do it." "Who's he?" said Ridcully. "Hex." "Oh, you mean it?" "That's what I said, sir. Yes." Another thing about the Horde, Mr. Savaloy had noticed, was their ability to relax. The old men had the cat-like ability to do nothing when there was nothing to do. They'd sharpened their swords, they'd had a meal, big lumps of meat for most of them, and some kind of gruel for Mad Hamish, who dribbled most of it down his beard. and assured its wholesomeness by dragging the cook in, nailing him to the floor by his apron, and suspending a large axe on a rope that crossed a beam in the roof and was held at the other end by Cohen while he ate. Then they sharpened their swords again, out of habit, and stopped. Occasionally one of them would whistle a snatch of a tune through what remained of his teeth, or search a bodily crevice for a particularly fretful louse. Mainly, though, they just sat and stared at nothing. After a long while, Caleb said, "You know, I've never been to XXXX. Been everywhere else. Often wondered what it's like." "Got shipwrecked there once," said Vincent. "Weird place. Lousy with magic. There's beavers with beaks and giant rats with long tails that hops around the place in boxes with one another. Black fellas wandering round all over the place. They say they're in a dream. Bright, though. Show 'em a bit of desert with one dead tree in it. Next minute they found a 3-course meal with fruits and nuts to follow. Beer's good, too." "Sounds like it." There was another long pause. Then, "I suppose they've got minstrels here? Be a bit of a bloody waste, wouldn't it, if we all got killed and no one made up any songs about it? Bound to have loads of minstrels, a city like this." "No problem there, then?" No. There was another lengthy pause. "Not that we're going to get killed." "Right. I don't intend to start getting killed at my time of life." Another pause. "Cohen?" "Yep." "You a religious man at all?" "Well, I've robbed lots of temples and killed a few mad priests in my time. Don't know if that counts." "What do your tribe believe happens to you when you die in battle?" "Oh, these big fat women in horned helmets take you off to the halls of Io, where there is fighting and carousing and quaffing forever." Another pause. "You mean like, really forever?" "Suppose so. 'Cause generally you get fed up even with turkey by about day 4. "All right. What do you lot believe?" "I think we go off to hell in a boat made of toenail clippings." "Something like that, anyway." Another long pause. "But it's not worth talking about, because we're not going to get killed today." "You said it. It's not worth dying if all you've got to look forward to is leftover meat and floating around in a boat smelling of your socks, is it, eh?" Another pause. "Down in Clutch, they believe if you lead a good life, you're rewarded by being sent to a paradise with lots of young women." "That's your reward, is it?" "Dunno. Maybe it's their punishment. But I do remember you eat sherbet all day." "Oh, when I was a lad, we had proper sherbet in them little tube things and a licorice straw to suck it up with. You don't get that sort of thing today. People are too busy rushing about." "Sounds a lot better than quaffing toenails, though." Another pause. "Did you ever believe that business about every enemy you killed becoming your servant in the next world?" "Dunno." "How many you killed?" "What? Oh, maybe 2,000-3,000, not counting dwarfs and trolls, of course." "Definitely not going to be short of a hairbrush or someone to open doors for you after you're dead, then?" A pause. "We're definitely not going to die, right?" "Right." "I mean, odds of 100,000 to 1. Huh. Difference is just a lot of zeros, right?" "Right." "I mean, stout comrades at our side, a strong right arm. What more could we want?" Pause. "A volcano would be favourite." Pause. "We're going to die, aren't we?" "Yep."
End of CD 7. CD 8.
The horde looked at one another.
"Still, To look on the bright side, I recall I still owe Fuffer the dwarf $50 for this sword, said Boy Willie. Looks as though I could end up ahead of the game. Mr. Saveloy put his head in his hands. I'm really sorry, he said. Don't worry about it, said Cohen. The grey light of dawn was just visible in the high windows. Look, said Mr. Saveloy, you don't have to die. We could sneak out. Back along the pipe, maybe. Perhaps we could carry Hamish. People are coming and going all the time. I'm sure we could get out of the city without any... His voice faded away. No voice could keep going under the pressure of those stairs. Even Hamish, whose gaze was generally focused on some point about 80 years away, was glaring at him. Ain't gonna run, said Hamish. It's not a running away, he managed. It's a sensible withdrawal. Tactics. Good grief, it's common sense. Ain't gonna run. Look, even barbarians can count, and you've admitted you're going to die. Ain't gonna run. Cohen leaned forward and patted Mr. Saveloy on the head. It's the heroing, see, he said. Who's ever heard of a hero running away? All them kids you was telling us about. You know, the ones who think we're stories. You reckon they'd believe we ran away? Well then, no, it's not part of the old deal, running away. Let someone else do the running. Besides, said Truckle, where would we get another chance like this? 6 against 5 armies. That's fantastic. We're not talking legends here. I reckon we've got a good crack at some mythology as well. But, you'll die. Oh, that's part of it, I grant you, that's part of it. But what a way to go, eh? Mr. Saveloy looked at them and realised that they were speaking another language in another world. It was one he had no key to, no map for. You could teach them to wear interesting pants and handle money, but something in their soul stayed exactly the same. Do teachers go anywhere special when they die? Said Cohen. I don't think so, said Mr. Saveloy gloomily. He wondered for a moment whether there really was a great free period in the sky. It didn't sound very likely. Probably there would be some marking to do. Well, whatever happens when you're dead, if you ever feel like a good quaff, you're welcome to drop in at any time, said Cohen. It's been fun, that's the important thing, and it's been an education, hasn't it, boys? There was a general murmur of assent. Amazing, all those long words. And learning to buy things. And social intercourse. Sorry. What? Shame it didn't work out, but I've never been one for plans, said Cohen. Mr. Saveloy stood up. I'm going to join you, he said grimly. What, to fight? Yes. Do you know how to handle a sword? Said Truckle. No. Then you've wasted all your life. Mr. Saveloy looked offended at this. I expect I'll get the hang of it as we go along, he said. Get the hang of it? It's a sword. Yes, but when you're a teacher, you have to pick things up fast. Mr. Saveloy smiled nervously. I once taught practical alchemy for a whole term when Mr. Schism was off sick after blowing himself up. And up until then, I'd never even seen a crucible. Here! Boy Willie handed the teacher a spare sword. He hefted it. I expect there's a manual or something? Manual? No, you hold the blunt end and poke the other end at people. Ah, really? Well, that seems quite straightforward. I thought there was rather more to it than that. You sure you want to come with us? Said Cohen. Mr. Saveloy looked firm. Absolutely. I very much doubt if I'll survive if you lose, and, well, it seems that you heroes get a better class of heaven. I must say, I rather suspect you get a better class of life too, and I really don't know where teachers go when they're dead, but I've got a horrible suspicion it'll be full of sports masters. It's just that I don't know if you could really go properly berserk, said Cohen.
Have you ever had the red mist come down and woke up to find you'd bitten 20 people to death? I used to be reckoned a pretty ratty man if people made too much noise in class, said Mr. Savoy, and something of a dead shot with a piece of chalk, too. How about you, taxman? 6 beneficent winds backed away hurriedly. I think I'm probably more cut out for undermining the system from within, he said. Fair enough. Cohen looked at the others. I've never done this official sort of warring before, he said. How's it supposed to go? I think you just line up in front of one another and then charge, said Mr. Savoy. Seems straightforward enough. All right, let's go. They strode, or in one case wheeled, and in another case moved at Mr. Savoy's gentle trot down the hall. The taxman trailed after them. Mr. Savoy, he shouted, you know what's going to happen. Have you lost your senses? Yes, said the teacher, but I may have found some better ones. He grinned to himself. The whole of his life so far had been complicated. There had been timetables and lists, and a whole basket of things he must do and things he shouldn't do, and the life of Mr. Savoy had been this little wriggly thing trying to survive in the middle of it all. But now it had suddenly all become very simple. You held one end, and you poked the other into people. A man could live his whole life by a maxim like that, and afterwards get a very interesting afterlife. Here, you'll need this too, said Caleb, poking something round at him as they stepped into the grey light. It's a shield. Ah, it's to protect myself, yes? If you really need to, bite the edge. Oh, I know about that, said Mr. Savoy. That's when you go berserk, right? Could be, said Caleb. That's why a lot of fighters do it, but personally, I do it because it's made of chocolate. Chocolate? You can never get a proper meal in these battles. And this is me, thought Mr. Savoy, marching down the street with the heroes. They are the great fighter. And when in doubt, take all your clothes off, said Caleb. What for? Sign of a good berserk, taking all your clothes off. Frightens the hell out of the enemy. Anyone starts laughing, stab 'em one. There was a movement among the blankets in the wheelchair. What? I said stab 'em one, Hamish. Hamish waved an arm that looked like bone with skin on it, and apparently far too thin to hold the axe he was in fact holding. That's right. Right in the nagers. Mr. Savoy nudged Caleb. I ought to be writing this down, he said. Where exactly are the nagers? Small range of mountains near the hub. Oh, fascinating. The citizens of Hung Hung were ranged along the city walls. It was not every day you saw a fight like this. Rincewind elbowed and kicked his way through the people until he reached the cadre, who'd managed to occupy a prime position over the main gate. What are you hanging around here for? He said. You could be miles away. We want to see what happens, of course, said Two-Flower, his spectacles gleaming. I know what happens. The horde will be instantly slaughtered, said Rincewind. What did you expect to happen? Ah, but you're forgetting the invisible vampire ghosts, said Two-Flower. Rincewind looked at him. What? Their secret army. I've heard that we've got some too. Should be interesting to watch. Two-Flower, there are no invisible vampire ghosts. Ah, yes. Everyone's going round denying it, said Lotus Blossom. So there must be some truth in it. But I made it up. Ah, you may think you made it up, said Two-Flower, but perhaps you are a pawn of fate. Listen, there's no... Same old Rincewind, said Two-Flower in a jolly way. You always were so pessimistic about everything, but it always worked out all right in the end. There are no ghosts. There are no magic armies, said Rincewind. There's just... When 7 men go out to fight an army 100,000 times bigger, there's only one way it can end, said Two-Flower. Right. I'm glad you see sense. They'll win, said Two-Flower. They've got to. Otherwise the world's just not working properly. You look educated, said Rincewind to Butterfly. Explain to him why he's wrong. It's because of a little thing we have in our country. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's called mathematics. The girl smiled at him. You don't believe me, do you? Said Rincewind flatly. You're just like him. What do you think this is? Homeopathic warfare? The smaller your side, the more likely you are to win? Well, it's not like that. I wish it was like that, but it isn't. Nothing is. There are no amazing strokes of luck, no magic solutions, and the good people don't win because they're small and plucky. He waved his hand irritably at something. You always survived, said Two-Flower. We had amazing adventures, and you always survived. That was just coincidence. You kept on surviving. And you got us safely out of prison, said Lotus Blossom. There were just a lot of coincidences. Will you go away? A butterfly skittered away from his flailing hand. Damn things, he mumbled, and added, well, that's it, I'm off. I can't watch. I've got things to do. Besides, afterwards, I think nasty people are going to be looking for me. And then he realised there were tears in Lotus Blossom's eyes. We thought you would do something, she said. Me? I can't do anything, especially not magic. I'm famous for it. Don't go around believing that great wizards solve all your problems, because there aren't any, and they don't, and I should know because I'm not one. He backed away. This is always happening to me. I'm just minding my own business and everything goes wrong, and suddenly everyone's relying on me and saying, oh, Rincewind, what are you going to do about it? Well, what Mrs. Rincewind's little boy, if she was a Mrs. Rincewind, of course, what he's going to do about it is nothing, right? You have to sort it all out yourselves. No mysterious magical armies are going to... Will you stop looking at me like that? I don't see why it's my fault. I've got other things to do. It's not my business. And then he turned and ran. The crowds didn't take much notice of him. The streets were deserted by hung standards, which means you could quite often see the cobbles. Rincewind pushed and shoved his way along the alleys nearest the wall, looking for another gateway with guards too busy to ask questions. There were footsteps behind him. Look, he said, spinning round. I told you, you can all... It was the luggage. It contrived to look a little ashamed of itself. Oh, turned up at last, have we? Said Rincewind savagely. What happened to the following master everywhere thing? The luggage shuffled its feet. From out of an alleyway came a slightly larger and far more ornate version of itself. Its lid was inset with decorative wood, and it seemed to Rincewind its feet were rather more dainty than the horny-nailed, calloused ones of the luggage. Besides, the toenails had been painted. Oh, he said. Well, good grief. Fair enough, I suppose. Really? I mean, yes. Well, come on then. He reached the end of the alley and turned round. The luggage was gently bumping the larger chest, urging it to follow him. Rincewind's own sexual experiences were not excessive, although he had seen diagrams. He hadn't the faintest idea about how it applied to travel accessories. Did they say things like, what a chest, or get a load of the hinges on that one? If it came to that, he had no real reason for considering that the luggage was male. Admittedly, it had a homicidal nature, but so had a lot of the women that Rincewind had met, and they'd often become a little more homicidal as a result of meeting him. Capacity for violence, Rincewind had heard, was unisexual. He wasn't sure what unisex was, but he expected that it was what he normally experienced. There was a small gate ahead. It seemed to be unguarded. Despite his fear, he walked through it and refrained from running. Authority always noticed a running man. The time to start running was around the E in Hey You. No one paid him any attention. The attention of the people along the wall was on the armies. Look at them, he said bitterly to the generality of the universe. Stupid. If it was 7 against 70, everyone would know who'd lose. Just because it's 7 against 700,000, everyone's not so sure. As though suddenly numbers don't mean anything anymore. Why should I do anything? It's not as if I even know the guy that well. Admittedly, he saved my life a couple of times, but that's no reason to die horribly just because he can't count. So you can stop looking at me like that. The luggage backed away a little. The other luggage. Rincewind supposed it just looked female. Women had bigger luggage than men, didn't they? Because of he moved into unknown territory. Extra frills and stuff. It was just one of those things, like the fact that they had smaller handkerchiefs than men, even though their noses were generally the same size. The luggage had always been the luggage. Rincewind wasn't mentally prepared for there to be more than one. There was the luggage, and the other luggage. Come on, both of you, he said. We're getting out of here. I've done what I can, I just don't care anymore. It's nothing to do with me. I don't see why everyone depends on me. I'm not dependable. Even I don't depend on me, and I'm me. Cohen looked at the horizon. Grey-blue clouds were piling up. Is a storm coming? He said. It's a mercy that we won't be alive to get wet then, said Boy Willie cheerfully. Funny thing, though, it looks like it's coming from every direction at once. Filthy foreign weather. You can't trust it. Cohen turned his attention to the armies of the 5 warlords. There seemed to have been some agreement. They'd arranged themselves around the position that Cohen had taken up. The tactic seemed quite clear. It was simply to advance. The horde could see the commanders riding up and down in front of their legions. How's it supposed to start? Said Cohen, the rising wind whipping at what remained of his hair. Does someone blow a whistle or something? Or do we just scream and charge? Commencement is generally by agreement, said Mr. Savoy. Oh. Cohen looked at the forest of lancers and pennants. Hundreds of thousands of men looked like quite a lot of men when you saw them close to. I suppose, he said slowly, that none of you has got some amazing plan you've been keeping quiet about? We thought you had one, said Truckle. Several riders had now left each army and approached the horde in a group. They stopped a little more than a spear's throw away and sat and watched. All right then, said Cohen. I hate to say this, but perhaps we should talk about surrender. No, said Mr. Savoy, and then stopped in embarrassment at the loudness of his own voice. No, he repeated a little more quietly. You won't live if you surrender. You just won't die immediately. Cohen scratched his nose. What's that flag, you know, when you want to talk to them without them killing you? It's got to be red, said Mr. Savoy. But look, it's no good. I don't know, red for surrender, white for funerals, muttered Cohen. All right. Anyone got something red? I've got a handkerchief, said Mr. Savoy, but it's white. And anyway, give it here. The barbarian teacher very reluctantly handed it over. Cohen pulled a small, worn knife from his belt. I don't believe this, said Mr. Savoy. He was nearly in tears. Cohen the barbarian talking surrender with people like that. Influence of civilization, said Cohen. It's probably made me go soft in the head. He pulled the knife over his arm and then clamped the handkerchief over the cut. There we are, he said. Soon have a nice red flag. The horde nodded approvingly. It was an amazingly symbolic, dramatic, and above all, stupid gesture, in the finest traditions of barbarian heroing. It didn't seem to be lost on some of the nearest soldiers either. Now, Cohen went on, I reckon you, Teach, and you, Truckle, you two come with me and we'll go and talk to these people. They'll drag you off to their dungeons, said Mr. Savoy. They've got torturers that can keep you alive for years. What? What's he saying? He said they can keep you alive for years in their dungeons, Hamish. Good. Fine by me. Oh dear, said Mr. Savoy. He trailed after the other two towards the warlords. Lord Hong raised his visor and stared down his nose at them as they approached. Red flag, look, said Cohen, waving the rather damp object on the end of his sword. Yes, said Lord Hong. We saw that little show. It may impress the common soldiers, but it does not impress me, barbarian. Place yourself, said Cohen. We've come to talk about surrender. Mr. Savoy noticed some of the lesser lords relax a little. Then he thought, a real soldier probably doesn't like this sort of thing. You don't want to go to soldier heaven or wherever you go and say, I once led an army against 7 old men. It wasn't medal-winning material. Ah, of course. So much for bravado, said Lord Hong. Then lay down your arms, and you will be escorted back to the palace. Cohen and Truckle looked at one another. Sorry, said Cohen. Lay down your arms, Lord Hong snorted. That means put down your weapons. Cohen gave him a puzzled look. Why should we put down our weapons?
Are we not talking about your surrender? Our surrender?
Mr. Savoy's mouth opened in a mad, slow grin. Lord Hong stared at Cohen.
You can hardly expect me to believe that you have come to ask us.
He leaned from the saddle and glared at them.
You do, don't you? He said. You mindless little barbarians. Is it true that you can only count up to 5?
We just thought it might save people getting hurt, said Cohen.
You thought it would save you getting hurt,
said the warlord. I dare say a few of yours might get hurt too.
They're peasants,
said the warlord.
Oh yes, I was forgetting that, said Cohen. And you're their chief, right? It's like your game of chess, right? I am their lord, said Lord Hong. They will die at my bidding, if necessary.
Cohen gave him a big, dangerous grin. When do we start? He said.
Return to your band, said Lord Hong, and then I think we shall start shortly.
He glared at Truckle, who was unfolding his bit of paper. The barbarian's lips moved awkwardly, and he ran a horny finger across the page.
Misbegotten wretch, so you are,
he said. My word, said Mr. Savoy, who'd created the look-up table. As the three returned to the horde, Mr. Savoy was aware of a grinding sound. Cohen was wearing several carrots off his teeth.
Die at my bidding, he said. The bugger doesn't even know what a chief is meant to be, bastard. Him and his horse.
Mr. Savoy looked around. There seemed to be some arguing among the warlords. You know, he said, they probably will try to take us alive. I used to have a headmaster like him. He liked to make people's lives a misery. You mean they'll be trying not to kill us, said Truckle. Yes. Does that mean we have to try not to kill them? No, I don't think so. Sounds okay to me. What do we do now? Said Mr. Savoy. Do we do a battle chant or something?
We just wait, said Cohen. There's a lot of waiting in warfare,
said Boy Willie. Ah, yes, said Mr. Savoy. I've heard people say that. They say there's long periods of boredom followed by short periods of excitement. Not really, said Cohen. It's more like short periods of waiting followed by long periods of being dead. Blast. The fields were crisscrossed with drainage ditches. There seemed to be no straight path anywhere, and the ditches were too wide to jump. They looked shallow enough to wade, but only because 18 inches of water overlay a suffocating depth of rich, thick mud. Mr. Savoy said that the Empire owed its prosperity to the mud of the plains, and right now Rincewind was feeling extremely rich. He was also quite close to the big hill that dominated the city. It really was rounded, with a precision apparently far too accurate for mere natural causes. Savoy had said that hills like that were drumlins, great piles of topsoil left behind by glaciers. Trees covered the lower slopes of this one, and there was a small building on the top. Cover. Now, that was a good word. It was a big plain, and the armies weren't too far away. The hill looked curiously peaceful, as if it belonged to a different world. It was strange that the Agateans, who otherwise seemed to farm absolutely everywhere a water buffalo could stand, had left it alone. Someone was watching him. It was a water buffalo. It would be wrong to say it watched him with interest. It just watched him, because its eyes were open and had to be facing in some direction, and it had randomly chosen one which included Rincewind. Its face held the completely serene expression of a creature that had long ago realized that it was fundamentally a tube on legs and had been installed in the universe to, broadly speaking, achieve throughput. At the other end of the string was a man ankle-deep in the mud of the field. He had a broad straw hat, like every other buffalo holder. He had the basic pyjama suit of the Agatean man in the field, and he had an expression not of idiocy, but of preoccupation. He was looking at Rincewind. As with the buffalo, this was only because his eyes had to be doing something. Despite the pressing dangers, Rincewind found himself overcome by a sudden curiosity. Good morning, he said. The man gave him a nod. The water buffalo made the sound of regurgitating cud. Sorry if this is a personal question, said Rincewind, but I can't help wondering, why do you stand out in the fields all day with the water buffalo? The man thought about it. Good for soil, he said eventually. But doesn't it waste a lot of time, said Rincewind. The man gave this due appraisal also. What's time to a cow, he said. Rincewind reversed back onto the highway of reality. You see those armies over there, he said. The buffalo holder concentrated his gaze. Yes, he decided. They're fighting for you. The man did not appear moved by this. The water buffalo burped gently. Some want to see you enslaved, and some want you to run the country, or at least to let them run the country while telling you it's you doing it really, said Rincewind. There's going to be a terrible battle. I can't help wondering, what do you want? The buffalo holder absorbed this one for consideration too, and it seemed to Rincewind that the slowness of the thought process wasn't due to native stupidity, but more to do with the sheer size of the question. He could feel it spreading out so that it incorporated the soil and the grass and the sun and headed on out into the universe. Finally, the man said, a longer piece of string would be nice. Oh, really? Well, there's a thing, said Rincewind. Talking to you has been an education. Goodbye. The man watched him go. Beside him, the buffalo relaxed some muscles and contracted others and lifted its tail and made the world, in a very small way, a better place. Rincewind headed on towards the hill. Random as the animal tracks and occasional plank bridges were, they seemed to head right for it. If Rincewind had been thinking clearly, an activity he last remembered doing around the age of 12, he might have wondered about that. The trees of the lower slopes were sapient pears, and he didn't even think about that. Their leaves turned to watch him as he scrambled past. What he needed now was a cave or a handy... He paused. Oh, no, he said. No, you don't catch me like that. I'll go into a handy cave and there'll be a little door or some wise old man or something and I'll be dragged back into events. Right. Stay out in the open. That's the style. He half climbed, half walked to the rounded top of the hill, which rose above the trees like a dome. Now he was closer. He could see that it wasn't as smooth as it looked from below. Weather had worn gullies and channels in the soil, and bushes had colonized every sheltered slope. The building on the top was, to Rincewind's surprise, rusty. It had been made of iron, pointed iron roof, iron walls, iron doorway. There were a few old nests and some debris on the floor, but it was otherwise empty, and not a good place to hide. It'd be the first place anyone would look. There was a cloud wall around the world now. Lightning crackled in its heart, and there was the sound of thunder, not the gentle rumble of summer thunder, but the crack, crack, crack of splitting sky. And yet the heat wrapped the plain like a blanket. The air felt thick. In a minute it was going to rain cats and food. Find somewhere where I won't be noticed, he muttered. Keep head down, only way. Why should I care? Other people's problem. Panting in the oppressive heat, he wandered on. Lord Hong was enraged. Those who knew him could tell by the way he spoke more slowly and smiled continuously.
And how do the men know the lightning dragons are angry? He said. It may be mere high spirits. Not with a sky that colour, said Lord Tang. That is not an auspicious colour for a sky. It looks like a bruise. A sky like that is portentous. And what, pray, do you think it portends? It's just generally portentous. I know what's behind this, Lord Hong snarled. You're too frightened to fight 7 old men, is that it? The men say they're the legendary 7 indestructible sages, said Lord Fang. He tried to smile. You know how superstitious they are. What 7 sages, said Lord Hong. I am extremely familiar with the history of the world, and there are no legendary 7 indestructible sages. Not yet, said Lord Fang. But a day like this, perhaps legends have to start somewhere. They're barbarians! Oh, gods! 7 men! Can I believe we're afraid of 7 men?
It feels wrong, said Lord McSweeney. He added quickly, that's what the men say.
You have made the proclamation about our celestial army of ghosts, all of you?
The warlords tried to avoid his gaze. Yes, said Lord Fang.
That must have improved morale?
Not entirely.
What do you mean, man? Many men have deserted. They've been saying that foreign ghosts were bad enough, but what?
They are soldiers, Lord Hong, said Lord Tang sharply. They all have people they do not want to meet, don't you? Just for a second, there was the suggestion of a twitch on Lord Hong's cheek. It was only for a second, but those who saw it took note. Lord Hong's renowned glaze had shown a crack.
What would you do, Lord Tang? Let these insolent barbarians go?
Of course not, but you don't need an army against 7 men, 7 ancient old men. The peasants say, they say. Lord Hong's voice was slightly higher.
Come on, man. Who talks to peasants? I'm sure you're going to tell us what they say about these foolhardy and foolish old men.
Well, that's it, you see. They say if they're so foolish and foolhardy, how did they manage to become so old?
Luck.
It was the wrong word. Even Lord Hong realized it. He'd never believed in luck. He'd always taken pains, usually those of other people, to fill life with certainties. But he knew that others believed in luck. It was a foible he'd always been happy to make use of. And now it was turning and stinging him on the hand. There is nothing in the art of war to tell us how 5 armies attack 7 old men, said Lord Tang. Ghosts or no ghosts. And this, Lord Hong, is because no one ever thought such a thing would be done.
If you feel so frightened, I'll ride out against them with my mere 250,000 men,
he said. I'm not frightened, said Lord Tang. I am ashamed.
Each man armed with 2 swords, Lord Hong went on, ignoring him, and I shall see how lucky these sages are. Because, my lords, I will only have to be lucky once. They will all have to be lucky 250,000 times.
He lowered his visor.
How lucky do you feel, my lords?
The other 4 warlords avoided one another's gaze. Lord Hong noticed their resigned silence.
Very well, then, he said. Let the gongs be sounded and the firecrackers lit, to ensure good luck, of course.
There were a large number of ranks in the armies of the Empire, and many of them were untranslatable. 3 Pink Pig and 5 White Fang were, loosely speaking, privates, and not just because they were pale, vulnerable, and inclined to curl up and hide when danger threatened. In fact, they were so private as to be downright secretive. Even the army's mules ranked higher than them, because good mules were hard to come by, whereas men like Pink Pig and White Fang are found in every army, somewhere where a latrine is in need of cleaning. They were so insignificant that they had privately decided that it would be a waste of an invisible foreign blood-sucking ghost's valuable time to attack them. They felt it only fair, after it had come all this way, to give it the chance of fiendishly killing someone superior. They had therefore hospitably decamped just before dawn and were now hiding out. Of course, if victory threatened, they could always recamp. It was unlikely that they'd be missed in all the excitement, and both men were somewhat expert at turning up on battlefields in time to join in the victory celebrations. They lay in the long grass, watching the armies maneuver. From this height, it looked like an impressive war. The army on one side was so small as to be invisible. Of course, if you accepted the very strong denials of last night, it was so invisible as to be invisible. It was also their elevation, which meant that they were the first to notice the ring around the sky. It was just above the thunderous wall on the horizon. Where stray shafts of sunlight hit it, it glowed golden. Elsewhere, it was merely yellow, but it was continuous and thin as a thread. Funny looking cloud, said White Fang. Yeah, said Pink Pig. So what? It was while they were thus engaged and sharing a small bottle of rice wine liberated by Pink Pig from an unsuspecting comrade the previous evening that they heard a groan. Their drinks froze in their throats. "Did you hear that?" said Pink Pig. "You mean the... Oh, that's it." They turned very slowly. Something had pulled itself out of a gully behind them. It was humanoid, more or less. Red mud dripped from it. Strange noises issued from its mouth. "Oh, shit!" Pink Pig grabbed White Fang's arm. "It's an invisible blood-sucking ghost." "But I can see it." Pink Pig squinted. "It's the Red Army. They've come up out of the earth like everybody says." White Fang, who had several brain cells more than Pink Pig, and more importantly was only on his second cup of wine, took a closer look. "It could be just one ordinary man with mud all over him," he suggested. He raised his voice. "Hey, you!" The figure turned and tried to run. Pink Pig nudged his friend. "Is he one of ours? Looking like that? Let's get him." "Why?" "'Cause he's running away." "Let him run. Maybe he's got money. Anyway, what's he running away for?" Rincewind slid down into another gully. Of all the luck. Soldiers should be where they were expected to be. What had happened to duty and honour and stuff like that? The gully had dead grass and moss in the bottom. He stood still and listened to the voices of the two men. The air was stifling. It was as if the oncoming storm was pushing all the hot air in front of it, turning the plane into a pressure cooker. And then the ground creaked and sagged suddenly. The faces of the absentee soldiers appeared over the edge of the gully. There was another creak, and the ground sank another inch or two. Rincewind didn't dare breathe in case the extra weight of air made him too heavy, and it was very clear that the least activity, such as jumping, was going to make things worse. Very carefully, he looked down. The dead moss had given away. He seemed to be standing on a bulk of timber buried in the ground, but dirt pouring all around it suggested that there was a hole beneath. It was going to give way any second. Rincewind threw himself forward. The ground fell away underneath, so that instead of standing on a slowly breaking piece of timber, he was hanging with his arms over what felt like another concealed log, and by the feel of it, one which was as riddled with rot as the first one. This one, possibly out of a desire to conform, began to sag, and then jolted to a stop. The faces of the soldiers vanished backwards as the sides of the gully began to slide. Dry earth and small stones slid past Rincewind. He could feel them rattle on his boots and drop away. He felt, as an expert in these things, that he was over a depth. From his point of view, it was also a height. The log began to shift again. This left Rincewind with, as he saw it, two options. He could let go and plunge to an uncertain fate in the darkness, or he could hang on until the timber gave way and then plunge to an uncertain fate in the darkness. And then, to his delight, there was a third option. The toe of his boot touched something, a root, a protruding rock, it didn't matter. It took some of his weight. It took at least enough to put him in precarious equilibrium, not exactly safe, not exactly falling. Of course, it was only a temporary measure, but Rincewind had always considered that life was no more than a series of temporary measures strung together. A pale yellow butterfly, with interesting patterns on its wing, fluttered along the gully and settled on the only bit of colour available, which turned out to be Rincewind's hat. The wood sagged slightly. "Push off," said Rincewind, trying not to use heavy language. "Go away." The butterfly flattened its wings and sunned itself. Rincewind pursed his lips and tried to blow up his own nostrils. Startled, the creature skittered into the air. "Ha!" said Rincewind, and, in response to its instincts in the face of threat, moved its wings like this. The bushes shivered, and around the sky the towering clouds curved into unusual patterns. Another cloud formed. It was about the size of an angry grey balloon, and it started to rain. Not rain generally, but specifically. Specifically on about a square foot of ground which contained Rincewind. Specifically on his hat. A very small bolt of lightning stung Rincewind on the nose. "Ah, so we have..." Pink Pig, appearing round the curve of the gully, hesitated a bit before continuing, slightly more thoughtfully, "A head in a hole with a very small thunderstorm above it." And then it dawned on him that, storm or no storm, nothing was preventing him from cutting off significant parts. The only significant part available was a head, but that was fine by him. At which point, Rincewind's hat having absorbed enough moisture, the ancient wood gave way under the strain and plunged him to an uncertain fate in the darkness. It was utterly dark. There had been a painful confusion of tunnels and sliding dirt. Rincewind assumed, or the small part of him that was not sobbing with fear assumed,
yeah, I'm gonna finish the stream. See you later, guys.